He had 7 minutes. 7 minutes to cross 6 blocks, walk into the most important interview of his life, and save his daughter from sleeping in a car. 7 minutes. And then he saw her. A woman, frozen in the middle of the intersection, headlights bearing down on her like the eyes of something hungry. Ryan Mercer didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just ran. Straight into traffic, straight into the path of a delivery truck doing 45, straight away from the only chance he had left. What he didn't know yet was that the woman he was about to save would end up saving him right back. If this story hits you, follow it to the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story travels. The coffee was cold, and that was the first sign the day was going sideways. Ryan Mercer stood in front of the bathroom mirror in boxer shorts and a white dress shirt that had been ironed 3 times because the collar kept folding wrong. The shirt was borrowed. The tie was borrowed. The shoes, scuffed black Oxfords that pinched his left foot, were from a thrift store on Halstead, $4 and change, and worth every cent of discomfort if they helped him walk into that interview looking like someone who belonged in a boardroom. He didn't belong in a boardroom. He knew that. He was 32 years old, 11 months behind on rent, 6 figures deep in medical debt, and standing in a bathroom where the hot water had stopped working 2 weeks ago because the landlord had stopped pretending to care. But the interview was real. The company was real. And the job, Director of Internal Operations at Bennett Dynamics, was the kind of opportunity that didn't come around twice for guys like him. Guys like him. He hated that phrase. His father had used it. His high school counselor had used it. Every bank officer who'd denied him a loan modification had used it, always with that same careful smile, that same tilt of the head that meant, "Look, buddy, we both know where you stand in the food chain." "Daddy?" Ryan turned. Emma stood in the bathroom doorway, 5 years old, brown hair tangled from sleep, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. The rabbit's name was Professor Carrots, and he was missing an eye and most of his stuffing, but Emma treated him like he was made of gold. "Hey, Bug, you're up early." "I heard you talking." "I wasn't talking. I was thinking out loud." "You were saying bad words." He almost laughed. "I was saying the collar won't stay flat." Emma walked over and looked up at him with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could manage. "You look handsome," she said. Then, after a pause, "Your hair is weird, though." "Weird how?" "Like a bird slept in it." Ryan crouched down so he was eye level with her. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the grape popsicles she'd snuck out of the freezer last night when she thought he was asleep. "Listen, Em, Daddy's got a really important meeting today. Mrs. Kowalski from downstairs is going to come up and hang out with you for a few hours. You're going to be good for her, right?" "Is she going to make me eat the soup again?" "Probably." "It tastes like feet." "You've never tasted feet." "I've smelled yours." He pulled her into a hug so she wouldn't see his face, because something in his chest had cracked open and he didn't trust himself not to show it. She was 5. She made jokes about soup tasting like feet. She didn't know that the eviction notice was taped to the inside of the kitchen cabinet where she couldn't reach it. She didn't know that the power company had sent its final warning. She didn't know that her father had been applying to jobs for 9 straight months and had heard nothing but silence, until 3 days ago, when his phone had rung and a woman with a clipped professional voice had said, "Mr. Mercer, we'd like to bring you in for an interview." Bennett Dynamics, one of the largest privately held technology firms in the Midwest. He'd applied on a whim, tailoring his resume to downplay the gaps and emphasize the logistics work he'd done before Jenna got sick. Before the hospital bills started arriving like artillery shells. Before the world he'd built collapsed room by room, wall by wall, until all that was left was this apartment, this daughter, and a borrowed shirt with a collar that wouldn't sit right. "I love you," he said into Emma's hair. "I love you too. Fix your hair." He fixed his hair, or tried. He checked the clock. 7:42 a.m. The interview was at 9 a.m. downtown, and the L was a 20-minute ride if the trains were running on time. They were almost never running on time. He grabbed his phone, his wallet, a folder with 3 printed copies of his resume, and headed for the door. Mrs. Kowalski was already in the hallway, a stout Polish woman in her 60s who smelled like cigarettes and bread dough. She'd been watching Emma off and on for the past year, refusing payment every time. Ryan had tried leaving $20 bills on her kitchen counter, and she'd taped them to his door with notes that said, in her jagged handwriting, "You insult me." "She's had toast," Ryan told her. "There's milk in the fridge. If she asks for a popsicle before noon, the answer is no." "Go," Mrs. Kowalski said, waving him away. "You look good. The tie is crooked." He straightened the tie. He kissed Emma one more time. He walked out of the building and into the October morning, and the cold hit him like a warning. The walk to the train station was 6 blocks, and Ryan covered them at a pace just shy of jogging. The neighborhood was rough. Not dangerous exactly, but tired. Tired buildings. Tired storefronts. Tired people waiting at bus stops with their shoulders hunched against the wind. He'd lived here for 3 years since they'd had to sell the house in Oak Park. That had been the beginning of the unraveling, the first domino. Jenna had tried to make the apartment feel like home. Curtains she'd sewn herself, a small herb garden on the windowsill, Emma's drawings taped to the refrigerator like a gallery. She'd been good at that, at finding beauty in reduced circumstances. She'd done it right up until she couldn't get out of bed anymore. Ryan pushed that thought down. He couldn't afford it. Not today. Today was about forward motion, about the interview, about walking into a room full of people who'd probably grown up with trust funds and prep schools, and proving that he could do the job better than any of them. Not because he was smarter. He wasn't sure he was smarter, but because he'd survived things that would have broken most of them, and that had to count for something. The platform at the Pulaski station was crowded, rush hour, bodies packed together, everyone staring at their phones with the glazed intensity of people trying to pretend they were somewhere else. Ryan found a spot near the edge and checked his phone. 7:58 a.m. The train was due at 8:02. That would get him to the loop by 8:25, and then it was a 10-minute walk to the Bennett Dynamics Tower on Wacker Drive. Plenty of time. He'd have 15 minutes to sit in the lobby, review his notes, calm his nerves, and walk in looking like a man who did this sort of thing every day. The train didn't come at 8:02. It didn't come at 8:10. At 8:15, a garbled announcement crackled through the speakers. Something about a signal problem at the Clinton stop. And Ryan felt the first real jolt of panic. He pulled up the transit app. Next train, 8:28. That would put him downtown at 8:50 at the earliest, and that was only if there were no more delays. He ran the math in his head. Get off at Clark/Lake. Walk fast. Really fast. Down Wacker. He could still make it. Barely. The train finally groaned into the station at 8:31. 3 minutes late even by the revised schedule. Ryan squeezed in, holding the folder against his chest like a shield. The car smelled like wet coats and someone's breakfast sandwich. A woman next to him was talking loudly into her phone about a custody hearing. A teenager across the aisle was playing music without headphones, some kind of bass-heavy track that rattled through the car like a second heartbeat. Ryan closed his eyes. He thought about Emma. About the look on her face when he'd come home 3 weeks ago and found her sitting on the kitchen floor, counting coins from a jar she'd hidden under her bed. "I'm helping," she'd said. "For the bills." The jar had $11.37. He'd sat down next to her, and they'd counted it together, and he'd told her she was the best helper in the world. And then he'd gone into the bathroom and cried so hard his ribs ached. He was not going to miss this interview. The train pulled into Clark/Lake at 8:49. 11 minutes. 11 minutes and 10 blocks. Ryan hit the platform at a dead run, briefcase folder under his arm, the borrowed shoes slapping concrete with every stride. The air was cold and sharp, cutting through his shirt, but he didn't care. He wove through crowds on Dearborn, cut down a side street to avoid a knot of tourists, and emerged onto Wacker Drive with 8 minutes to spare. He could see the building. Bennett Dynamics occupied the top 12 floors of a steel and glass tower that caught the morning sun and threw it back in sheets of white light. It looked expensive. It looked like the kind of place where people who'd never counted coins on a kitchen floor made decisions that moved markets. 7 minutes. He was going to make it. He was crossing Adams when he saw her. The intersection was wide. 4 lanes each direction, a major artery where commuter traffic met delivery trucks and rideshare cars in a grinding, aggressive dance. The light had changed, traffic was moving, And in the middle of it all, standing perfectly still, was a young woman in a dark coat. She wasn't crossing. She wasn't moving at all. She was just standing there, eyes fixed on something Ryan couldn't see, or maybe on nothing at all. A car swerved around her, horn blaring. Another one braked hard, tires chirping. She didn't flinch. Ryan's brain did the math instantly, the way it always did in moments like these. The cold, efficient calculation of cost and benefit that survivors learn to run without thinking. The intersection was 50 feet away. The woman was in the second lane. Traffic was accelerating. If he kept walking, he'd make the interview. If he stopped, he wouldn't. And then he saw the truck. It was a delivery truck, white, boxy, the kind that hauled restaurant supplies or dry goods, and it was in the far lane, coming fast. The driver was looking down, at his phone, at a clipboard, at something that wasn't the road. The truck was doing at least 40, maybe 45, and the woman was directly in its path, and the driver hadn't looked up, and Ryan could see with terrible clarity exactly what was about to happen. He didn't make a decision. That's what he'd tell people later, the few times he talked about it. There was no moment of deliberation, no weighing of options. His body simply moved. 1 second he was on the sidewalk, folder in hand, 11 minutes from the most important meeting of his life. The next second he was sprinting into 4 lanes of traffic, and the world narrowed to a tunnel. The woman, the truck, the gap between them that was closing by the second. He heard horns, he heard brakes, he heard someone scream, a high, sharp sound that cut through the noise of the city like a knife through fabric. He hit the woman at full speed, wrapping his arms around her and throwing both of them forward, and the truck passed so close behind them that he felt the wind of it on his back, felt the heat of the engine, smelled diesel and rubber, and something that might have been his own fear. They hit the pavement together. Ryan took most of the impact on his right side. Shoulder, hip, knee, all of it grinding against asphalt. The folder exploded from his hand, and his resumes scattered across the intersection like confetti. His borrowed shirt ripped at the shoulder. His palm opened up against the road, a long scrape that started bleeding immediately. The woman landed on top of him, then rolled off, and for a moment they both lay there, breathing hard, staring up at the gray October sky. The truck driver had finally stopped. He was standing outside his cab, face white, hands shaking. "I didn't see her," he kept saying. "I swear I didn't see her." People were gathering. Phones were out. Someone was calling 911. Ryan pushed himself to a sitting position and looked at his hands. The right one was a mess. Gravel embedded in the heel of his palm, blood running down his wrist. His knee throbbed. His shoulder felt like someone had taken a hammer to it. He looked at the woman. She was sitting up now, staring at him with wide eyes. She was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 30, dark hair, sharp features, expensive coat now scuffed and dirty. She was shaking, her whole body vibrating with a fine tremor that she seemed to be fighting to control. "Are you okay?" Ryan asked. His voice sounded strange to him, thin and far away. You just... She couldn't finish the sentence. "Are you hurt? Did you hit your head?" She touched her forehead, looked at her hand. No blood. "No, I don't think so. I'm okay." She looked at him again, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted from shock to comprehension. "You just ran into traffic." "Yeah." "You could have been killed." "Yeah. Well..." He looked at the scattered pages of his resume, one of them pinned under the tire of a stopped car, another one drifting toward the gutter. Seemed like the thing to do. A paramedic arrived. A compact woman with efficient hands who cleaned Ryan's palm, checked his shoulder, and told him he should get an x-ray. He said he'd think about it. He didn't have insurance. "Seriously," the paramedic said, "you could have a hairline fracture." "I'll ice it." "Sir, I'll ice it. Thank you." The woman in the dark coat was being checked by a second paramedic. She'd stopped shaking, but she still looked rattled, and she kept glancing at Ryan like she was trying to solve an equation that wouldn't balance. When the paramedic cleared her, she walked over to where Ryan was sitting on the curb, cradling his bandaged hand. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to. You literally threw yourself in front of a truck." In front of is a strong way to put it. I was aiming for slightly ahead of. She almost smiled. Almost. What's your name? Ryan. Ryan Mercer. Something changed in her face. It was subtle. A flicker, a tightening around the eyes. And then it was gone. Ryan Mercer, she repeated. Yeah. I'm Olivia. Olivia Bennett. The name didn't register. Not immediately. He was in pain, running on adrenaline, sitting on a curb in a torn shirt with blood on his pants and gravel in his hand, and the certain knowledge that the interview he'd needed like oxygen was now 7 minutes past its start time. He looked up at the Bennett Dynamics Tower, gleaming in the morning light, and then he looked back at the woman standing in front of him, and the connection hit him like a second truck. Bennett, he said, as in the building you keep staring at. Yes. Ryan stared at her. Then he looked down at his ruined shirt, his bleeding hand, the scrape on his knee that was already stiffening. Then he looked at his resumes, scattered across an intersection, run over by cars soaked in gutter water. I had an interview, he said. At your company. About 12 minutes ago. I know, Olivia said. I was the one you were supposed to meet. The silence that followed was enormous. Ryan felt it settle over him like a physical weight. The absurdity of it, the cosmic, grinding irony. He'd spent 3 days preparing for this meeting. He'd rehearsed answers to every question he could imagine. He'd ironed the borrowed shirt 3 times. He'd told his daughter he was going to fix everything. And now he was sitting on a curb with road rash and a torn collar, and the woman he'd pulled out of traffic was the CEO whose hand he was supposed to shake. He stopped, started again. That's really something. Yeah, Olivia said quietly. It is. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a business card, and held it out. Her hand was steady now, but her eyes were still carrying something. Not fear exactly, but the echo of it, the aftershock. Come to my office tomorrow, she said. 9 a.m. The front desk will have your name. I look like I lost a fight with a parking lot. I'm aware. My resume is currently being used as a speed bump. I don't care about your resume. He took the card. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, with her name and title in simple black type. Olivia Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. Bennett Dynamics. Below that, a phone number and an email address. No tagline, no logo, just the facts. Why? He asked. It came out more bluntly than he intended, but he was too tired and too sore for diplomacy. You don't know me. You haven't seen my qualifications. I'm sitting here looking like I don't even know what I look like. You look like a man who ran into traffic to save a stranger, Olivia said. In my experience, that tells me more about someone than any resume ever could. She paused. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't be late. She turned and walked toward the building. Ryan watched her go. The straight back, the deliberate stride, the way she pulled her phone from her pocket and was already making a call before she'd crossed the street. She didn't look back. Ryan sat on the curb for another 10 minutes. The paramedic came back and tried again to convince him to go to the hospital. He declined again. A police officer took his statement. The truck driver apologized 4 separate times, each time more desperately than the last. Ryan told him it wasn't his fault, that these things happened, that everyone was okay. When the crowd finally dispersed, Ryan gathered what was left of his resumes, 2 crumpled, tire-tracked pages that were barely legible, and started walking. Not toward the train, not toward home, just walking because he needed to move, needed to feel his legs working, needed to burn off the cocktail of adrenaline and panic and something else, something he couldn't name, that was building in his chest. He ended up at a small park near the river. There was a bench overlooking the water, and he sat on it and called Mrs. Kowalski. How'd it go? She asked immediately. It was eventful. That's not an answer. I'll tell you when I get home. How's Emma? She ate the soup, under protest. She wants you to know that she suffered. Tell her I appreciate her sacrifice. He hung up and sat there, watching the river move. The sun was higher now, warming the bench, and the city was doing what cities do, grinding forward, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its intersections. A man had almost died. A woman had been saved. Resumes had been ruined. And somehow, improbably, there was a business card in his pocket that might mean something. Or it might mean nothing. People made promises in moments of crisis all the time. They said things they didn't mean, offered things they'd forget about by lunch. Olivia Bennett was a CEO. She probably had 20 people vying for her attention before breakfast. By tomorrow, she might not even remember his name. But she'd remembered his name at the intersection. She'd said it, Ryan Mercer, with a recognition that seemed to go beyond gratitude. She'd looked at him like she was seeing something that surprised her, something she hadn't expected to find on a curb in a torn shirt with gravel in his hand. He turned the business card over. On the back, in small handwriting, she'd written something he hadn't noticed before. 2 words in blue ink, "Don't quit." Ryan read those 2 words 3 times. Then he put the card back in his pocket, stood up from the bench, and started walking home. The apartment was quiet when he got back. Mrs. Kowalski had left a plate of pierogi on the counter. The real kind, handmade, stuffed with potato and cheese. There was a note. Emma napping. You eat. The shirt is ruined, but you are not. He ate standing up, too tired to sit, too wired to rest, his mind running through the morning on a loop. The train delay, the intersection, the truck, the fall, Olivia's face, the card, the 2 words on the back. When Emma woke up from her nap, she took one look at his bandaged hand and burst into tears. "Daddy, you're hurt." "It's a scrape, bug, like when you fell off the swing, remember? A big Band-Aid and it's all better. But you're all scratched up." "I had an adventure." She looked at him suspiciously. "What kind of adventure?" He sat on the couch and pulled her onto his lap, being careful with his right hand. "The kind where someone needed help, and I helped them." "Like a superhero?" "No, like a regular person who did the right thing." "Mommy said regular people can be heroes, too." His throat tightened. "Yeah, she did say that." Emma studied his face with that unnerving intensity children have, the kind that sees through every mask and every deflection. "Did you get the job?" "Not yet, but I might have another chance." "Is it a good job?" "It could be." "Will we have to eat Mrs. Kowalski's soup forever?" "That's the first thing I'm changing." She grinned, and the grin was so much like Jenna's, the same slight asymmetry, the same way it reached her eyes before it reached her mouth, that Ryan had to look away for a second. "I want to stay here," Emma said suddenly. "In the apartment?" "With you. I don't want to go somewhere else." He knew what she meant. She'd overheard things, fragments of phone calls, pieces of conversations he thought he'd been having quietly enough. Kids heard everything. They understood more than adults gave them credit for, and they worried about things no child should have to worry about. "We're not going anywhere, so," Ryan said. "I promise." It was a dangerous promise. He knew it even as he said it. The eviction notice gave them 45 days, and 20 of those were already gone. The back rent was 4 months' worth, over $6,000. He had $800 in checking, another $300 in the jar under the bathroom sink that he thought Emma didn't know about. The numbers didn't work. They hadn't worked in a long time, but Olivia's card was in his pocket, and her handwriting said, "Don't quit," and tomorrow was another day. He put Emma to bed at 8, read her a chapter from a book about a mouse who wanted to be a chef, tucked Professor Carrots under the covers next to her, turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, the small rise and fall of her chest under the blanket, the way her hand curled around the stuffed rabbit's remaining ear. Then he went to the kitchen table and opened his laptop. The battery was at 12%. The charger cable was fraying, another thing he couldn't afford to replace. And he pulled up everything he could find about Bennett Dynamics. The company was impressive. Founded 15 years ago by Olivia's father, Robert Bennett, it had started as a small logistics consulting firm and grown into a major technology company with contracts in healthcare supply chain, military logistics, and commercial shipping optimization. Revenue was north of $2 billion. They had offices in 4 cities. The board of directors read like a who's who of Chicago business. Old money names, venture capital heavyweights, people who'd been making deals since before Ryan was born. And then there was Olivia. She'd taken over as CEO 2 years ago, after her father's retirement. The business press had been skeptical. She was young, untested, and stepping into shoes that most analysts said were too big for anyone to fill. but she'd surprised them. Revenue was up 14%. Employee satisfaction scores had climbed. She'd launched a new division focused on AI-driven logistics that was already attracting attention from the Department of Defense. Ryan scrolled through her biography. Stanford undergrad, MIT for her MBA, a 2-year stint at McKinsey before joining the family business. She spoke 3 languages. She sat on the board of a children's hospital. She'd been named to Forbes' 30 Under 30 list 6 years ago. He looked at his own resume, the crumpled tire-tracked copy he'd salvaged from the intersection. State school, no MBA, 5 years at a mid-sized shipping company doing route optimization and warehouse management. Then Jenna's diagnosis and the slow-motion collapse that followed. He'd been good at his job. His performance reviews said so. His boss had said so, right up until the day he'd had to let Ryan go because the absences had become untenable. What could he possibly offer a company like Bennett Dynamics? What could he bring to a boardroom filled with Stanford graduates and McKinsey alumni? He closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the radiator click and the distant sound of traffic. The business card was on the table in front of him. He picked it up, turned it over, read the 2 words again. Don't quit. Easy to say. Harder to do when you're sitting in a kitchen with a 12% battery and an eviction notice in the cabinet and a daughter who counts coins under her bed to help with the bills. But Ryan Mercer had survived worse than a bad day. He'd survived holding his wife's hand while she died at 30. He'd survived telling his 3-year-old that mommy wasn't coming home. He'd survived 2 years of grief and debt and the slow erosion of everything he'd thought his life was supposed to be. He'd walked through fire, and he was still standing, and maybe that was exactly the qualification that no resume could capture. He set his alarm for 6. He ironed another shirt, his own this time, not borrowed, a plain blue button-down that was old but clean and pressed sharp enough to cut paper. He checked his bandaged hand, flexed his fingers, winced. He set out his least damaged pair of shoes. Then he went to bed, and for the first time in months, he didn't lie awake counting debts and running worst-case scenarios. He fell asleep thinking about a woman standing in an intersection and a truck that missed, and 2 words written in blue ink on the back of a business card. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't be late. The morning came gray and cold, the kind of Chicago autumn day that felt personal, like the weather had looked at the forecast and decided to make things harder just because it could. Ryan was up before the alarm, showered, cold water, same as always, dressed carefully, checking every button, every crease. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man with a scrape on his jaw, a bandage on his right hand, and a bruise darkening under his left eye that he didn't remember getting. He didn't look like a corporate executive. He looked like a guy who'd been in a bar fight, but his shirt was pressed, his shoes were polished, and his eyes were steady, and that would have to be enough. Mrs. Kowalski arrived at 8:15, carrying a plate of something that smelled like butter and cinnamon. "Kolatsky," she said, handing him the plate. "For luck." "You don't believe in luck." "I believe in pastry. Eat one. Give the rest to Emma." He ate one standing in the hallway. It was perfect, flaky, sweet, with a ribbon of jam in the center that tasted like someone's grandmother had spent an afternoon making it, which was exactly what had happened. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, not just the food." She looked at him with the same expression she always wore, somewhere between exasperation and affection, like a woman who'd raised 5 children and wasn't about to be impressed by sentiment. "Go," she said, "and this time don't run into traffic." The train was on time. The walk was uneventful. He arrived at the Bennett Dynamics Tower at 8:47 and stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, looking up at it. The glass and steel caught the gray sky and turned it into something almost beautiful, muted, reflective, a building that looked like it was thinking. He walked in. The lobby was enormous. Marble floors, high ceilings, a reception desk that looked like it was carved from a single piece of granite. There was a waterfall feature on one wall, the kind of thing that probably cost more than Ryan's annual salary. Security guards in dark suits, people moving purposefully, talking on phones, carrying laptops, all of them dressed in clothes that fit perfectly and probably cost more than his car. Ryan approached the reception desk. A young man with immaculate hair and a smile that seemed factory-installed looked up at him. "Can I help you?" Ryan Mercer, I have a 9 o'clock with Olivia Bennett. The receptionist's eyes flicked to Ryan's bandaged hand, to the scrape on his jaw, to the bruise under his eye. His smile didn't change. It was professionally calibrated to remain constant regardless of what walked through the door. But there was a slight pause, a fraction of a second, that told Ryan everything about what he looked like in this building. "One moment, please." He typed something, paused, typed again. "You're confirmed. 32nd floor. The elevator bank is to your left. Ms. Bennett's assistant will meet you." "Thank you." The elevator was glass-walled, and as it climbed, Ryan watched the city fall away below him. The streets, the river, the rooftops, all of it shrinking into a map of the life he'd been living at ground level. Up here, the world looked different, cleaner, more organized, like someone had taken all the chaos and mess and struggle and smoothed it into neat lines and right angles. The doors opened onto the 32nd floor, and a woman was waiting. Tall, early 40s, hair pulled back tight, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost a mortgage payment. She looked at Ryan the way a customs agent looks at a suspicious passport. "Mr. Mercer?" "That's me." "I'm Diana Cross, Miss Bennett's chief of staff. Follow me, please." She led him down a corridor lined with glass-walled offices. Inside them, people worked at standing desks and sat in ergonomic chairs, their screens filled with data and charts, and things Ryan couldn't decipher from a hallway. Everyone looked polished. Everyone looked like they belonged. He was acutely aware of his bandaged hand, his bruised face, the slight limp in his left leg from where his knee had hit the pavement. Diana stopped at a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. "Ms. Bennett will be with you in a moment," she said, in a tone that suggested the moment might last anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 hours, depending on Ms. Bennett's schedule and mood. "Thanks." "There's water on the table." And she hesitated, looking at his hand. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Small disagreement with some asphalt." "I heard." The slightest crack in her professional armor. "What you did was extraordinary." Before Ryan could respond, the door opened and Olivia was there. She looked different from the day before. Yesterday she'd been shaken, her coat dirty, her composure fractured. Today she was fully assembled, navy dress, heels, hair pulled back, the kind of put together that communicated authority without trying. But her eyes were the same, dark, direct, carrying that same quality of assessment that Ryan had noticed on the curb. "Mr. Mercer, come in." Her office was large, but not ostentatious. Windows on 2 sides, overlooking the river and the city beyond. A desk that was more workspace than showpiece. Papers, a laptop, 2 monitors, a coffee cup with a lipstick print on the rim. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled not with decorative leather-bound volumes, but with actual books. Technical manuals, business texts, a few novels. A framed photograph on the desk showed an older man with silver hair and Olivia's same sharp features. Her father, Ryan guessed. "Sit down," Olivia said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "How's your hand?" "Functional." "Did you see a doctor?" "Didn't need to." "That's not what I asked." He met her eyes. "No, I didn't see a doctor." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, seeming to file the information away without comment. She sat behind her desk and folded her hands. "I'll be direct with you, Mr. Mercer. I pulled your application file this morning. Your work experience is solid, but limited. You have no corporate leadership background, no advanced degree, and a 2-year employment gap. On paper, you wouldn't make it past the first screening." "I'm aware. I'm not finished. What I saw yesterday, what you did, that's not something I can screen for. I've been running this company for 2 years. I've hired Ivy League graduates, McKinsey consultants, people with resumes that read like fiction, and I've watched some of them fold at the first sign of pressure. They were brilliant on paper and useless when it mattered." She leaned forward. "You ran into traffic. You had no time to think, no time to calculate. You just moved. That's instinct. That's character. And in my experience, character is the one thing you can't teach, can't train, and can't fake." Ryan said nothing. He wasn't sure what to say. "The position I'm offering is Director of Internal Operations," Olivia continued. "It's a mid-level role, but it has visibility. You'd report to the VP of Operations, but you'd have access to every department. The job is to look at how this company works from the inside and find what's broken. Inefficiencies, waste, gaps. I want someone who sees things that the people who've been here for 10 years have stopped seeing. Why me? Because you're an outsider. You don't know the politics. You don't owe anyone favors. You haven't been here long enough to learn which problems are supposed to be ignored. Some people would say those are weaknesses. Some people are wrong. She paused. The salary is $140,000 with benefits starting on day one. Health insurance for you and your daughter. Ryan's poker face wasn't perfect, and he knew she saw the flinch. Health insurance. He hadn't had health insurance since his last job's Cobra had run out 18 months ago. Emma's last checkup had been at a free clinic, waiting 3 hours in a room that smelled like antiseptic and resignation. There's also a signing bonus, Olivia said. $20,000, paid within the first week. $20,000. That was the back rent. That was the eviction notice ripped up and thrown away. That was staying in the apartment, keeping Emma in her school, not having to pack their lives into garbage bags and drive to a shelter. When would I start? His voice was steady, but barely. Monday. 5 days. 5 days from now, he'd walk into this building as an employee. He'd have a desk, a salary, insurance. He'd be able to take Emma to a real doctor. He'd be able to buy groceries without checking his bank balance first. He'd be able to sleep without the calculator running behind his eyes, adding up all the ways the money didn't work. I'll be here, Ryan said. Olivia stood and extended her hand. He shook it, left hand because the right one was bandaged. And her grip was firm, her palm warm, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that felt like a challenge and a welcome at the same time. One more thing, she said as he turned to leave. The people in this building are going to underestimate you. They're going to look at your resume and see the gaps. They're going to look at your clothes and see where you came from. Some of them are going to try to make you feel like you don't belong here. I've been underestimated before. I know, she said. That's why I hired you. Ryan walked out of the office, past Diana Cross and her assessing eyes, down the corridor of glass-walled offices, into the elevator, and through the marble lobby. He stepped onto the sidewalk and stood there, holding a folder with his new employment contract, feeling the October wind cut through his shirt. Then he pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Kowalski. How was it? She asked. I got the job. A pause, then, in a voice that was thick and rough in a way he'd never heard from her before. Good. That's good, Ryan. I start Monday. The salary is, it's good. There's insurance. There's a signing bonus. You tell Emma yet? I'm about to. Tell her the soup days are over. I'm making pierogi for dinner. He laughed. It was the first real laugh he'd produced in months, and it surprised him. The sound of it, the way it came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been locked shut for a long time. He hung up and started walking toward the train. The city looked different now. Not better exactly. The buildings were the same, the streets were the same, the wind was the same cold knife. But the way he moved through it had changed. He was walking with his head up. His shoulders were back. His stride was longer. He had a job. He had a chance. And in 5 days, he was going to walk into a building full of people who thought he didn't belong and show them exactly what a man with nothing to lose could do. The train home was crowded, but he got a seat. He sat by the window and watched the neighborhood slide past. The high-rises giving way to brick two-flats. The storefronts getting smaller and more tired. The Chicago he actually lived in reasserting itself block by block. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes. When he got home, Emma was at the kitchen table, drawing with crayons. She looked up, scanned his face, and apparently found what she was looking for because her whole body relaxed. You got it, she said. Not a question. How'd you know? You're smiling. You don't smile like that unless something good happened. He crouched down next to her chair. I got the job, Em. A good job. A really good one. Does this mean? It means we're staying, right here, in this apartment. You and me and Professor Carrots. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her, and she was warm and small and alive, and the business card in his pocket pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat, and the 2 words written on the back, Don't quit, felt less like advice now and more like a prophecy that was already coming true. Ryan's first Monday at Bennett Dynamics started with a badge that didn't work. He stood in the lobby at 7:48 a.m., 12 minutes early, wearing the blue button-down he'd ironed the night before and a pair of khakis he'd bought at a discount store over the weekend, the nicest ones he could find for $30. His signing bonus hadn't cleared yet. The employment contract said 5 to 7 business days, which meant he was still running on fumes, still counting every dollar, still carrying the eviction notice in the back of his mind like a stone in his shoe. But he was here. He'd showed up, and his badge wouldn't scan. The security guard, a big man with a shaved head and an expression that suggested he'd seen every kind of awkwardness this lobby could produce, watched Ryan swipe the card 3 times before stepping over. "Let me see that." He took the badge, looked at it, looked at Ryan, looked at the badge again. "This is a visitor pass. You need an employee badge." "I was told this was my badge." "Who told you?" "The woman in HR. I went through orientation Friday afternoon." The guard swiped it on his own reader. Nothing. "System's not recognizing you. Hold on." He picked up a phone, dialed, spoke to someone in a tone that was half bored, half annoyed, then hung up. "They're sending someone down. You can wait over there." Over there was a cluster of chairs near the waterfall feature, the same spot where visitors and delivery people waited. Ryan sat down and watched the real employees stream through the turnstiles, badge swipe, green light, forward motion, all of it smooth and automatic, people who belonged and knew it. He felt the familiar heat in his chest, the one that lived somewhere between embarrassment and anger, and he pushed it down. Not today. He was not going to let a bad badge ruin his first morning. 15 minutes later, Diana Cross appeared. She was wearing the same expression she'd worn the first time they'd met. Professionally neutral, with an undercurrent of assessment that made Ryan feel like a specimen under glass. "Badge issue," she said. "Not a question. Apparently I don't exist in the system yet. HR is running behind. I'll walk you up." She produced a MasterCard and swiped them both through the turnstile. "This happens with new hires sometimes. Don't take it personally." I wasn't. "Good. Because the next few weeks are going to give you plenty of real things to take personally." She said it without malice, more like a weather report. Chance of rain, bring an umbrella. But the warning landed. Ryan filed it away and followed her into the elevator. His office was on the 28th floor, 4 levels below Olivia's. It was small, a glass-walled box with a desk, a computer, a phone, and a view of the building across the street. The desk was bare except for a thin laptop, still in its plastic wrap, and a folder labeled onboarding materials that was thick enough to be a novella. "Your system access should be active by noon," Diana said. "IT is backed up. In the meantime, the onboarding folder has org charts, department summaries, and the operational review from last quarter. I'd suggest starting there." "Got it." She paused at the door. "One more thing. Your role gives you access to department heads across the company. That's unusual for a director-level position. Some people are going to wonder why. Some people are going to resent it. Be prepared." "You're the second person to warn me about that." "Then it's probably worth taking seriously." She left, and Ryan was alone. He sat down, unwrapped the laptop, and opened the onboarding folder. The org chart was a sprawling, color-coded document that mapped the company's structure. Divisions, departments, reporting lines, committees. It looked like a family tree designed by someone who hated simplicity. He spent 20 minutes studying it, memorizing names and titles, trying to build a mental map of who reported to whom and where the power centers were. The operational review was denser. 78 pages of metrics, benchmarks, and analysis covering the previous fiscal quarter. Revenue was up, as Olivia had mentioned, but the margins were thinner than they should have been. Shipping costs were climbing faster than volume growth. Vendor expenses in the logistics division had spiked by 18% over the past year, which the report attributed to market conditions and contract renegotiations. Ryan read that line twice. In his experience, an 18% spike in vendor costs was rarely just market conditions. It was either poor negotiation, poor oversight, or something worse. He made a note. Then he made several more. By noon, his system access was active, and he'd read the entire folder. He was halfway through his second pass of the logistics section when someone knocked on his glass door. Ryan looked up and saw a man standing in the hallway, mid-50s, silver hair combed back from a broad forehead, wearing a suit that probably cost more than everything in Ryan's closet combined. He had the kind of face that managed to look friendly and calculating at the same time, like a poker player who smiled while he raised. "Ryan Mercer?" The man opened the door without waiting for an answer. "Victor Hale, Senior Vice President, Strategic Operations." He extended his hand, and his handshake was exactly what Ryan expected. Firm enough to establish dominance, brief enough to maintain efficiency. "Welcome aboard." "Thank you." Victor settled into the chair across from Ryan's desk like he owned it. "Olivia told me about your hiring. Quite a story. Traffic, a truck, the whole thing." He smiled. "Very dramatic." "It was a busy morning. I'll bet." Victor's eyes moved across Ryan's desk. The open folder, the laptop, the notes Ryan had been scrawling on a legal pad. "Getting the lay of the land?" "Trying to." "Smart. There's a lot to absorb. Bennett Dynamics is a complex operation. 1,200 employees, 4 offices, contracts with everyone from regional hospitals to the Department of Defense. It takes most new hires 6 months just to understand the org chart. I've been studying it. And what do you think so far?" Ryan considered the question. It felt like a test, and he wasn't sure what the right answer was. The honest answer was that the logistics division's numbers looked wrong, but he'd been on the job for 4 hours and wasn't about to start making accusations. "I think there's a lot of room to learn," he said carefully. Victor nodded, still smiling. "Diplomatic. That's good. You'll need that here." He stood, buttoning his jacket with the practiced ease of a man who'd been buttoning expensive jackets his entire life. "If you need anything, anything at all, my office is on 30. Come by any time." "I appreciate that. We're all on the same team, Ryan." He said it warmly, the way a mentor might, but something in the delivery didn't quite land. It was too polished, too ready, like a line he'd used before and would use again. "Good luck with the reading. It gets easier." He left, and Ryan sat staring at the door for a long moment. Then he looked down at his notes, at the circled number, 18%, and the question mark he'd drawn next to it. Something about Victor Hale bothered him. He couldn't articulate it yet, couldn't point to a specific word or gesture and say, That's the problem." It was more like a frequency, a low hum beneath the polish, beneath the smile and the expensive suit and the offer to help. Ryan had learned to trust that frequency. It had served him well in his old job when he'd flagged a vendor who turned out to be double billing. It had served him well on the street when he'd crossed to the other side because something about a parked car didn't feel right. It wasn't logic. It was pattern recognition, the kind that came from years of operating in situations where reading people correctly was the difference between getting ahead and getting hurt. He went back to the numbers. The first week was a blur of meetings, introductions, and the slow, grinding process of learning how a company of this size actually worked. Ryan met department heads, attended briefings, sat through presentations filled with jargon he had to look up later. He ate lunch alone in the cafeteria, a gleaming, sunlit space on the 15th floor where the salads cost $14 and the coffee came in cups the size of soup bowls, and tried not to think about the fact that everyone around him was wearing watches that cost more than his car. The other executives were polite. That was the most generous way to put it. They shook his hand, asked about his background, and listened to his answers with expressions that ranged from blank courtesy to barely concealed skepticism. A woman named Claire Ashford, the VP of Human Capital, asked him where he'd gone to business school. When he said he hadn't, her smile tightened by exactly 1 degree. "Interesting," she said. "Olivia mentioned you had an unconventional background." "That's one way to put it." "And what would you call it?" "Real world." She laughed, a short, bright sound that carried no actual amusement, and excused herself. The worst was a meeting on Wednesday, a departmental review with 8 senior leaders around a conference table. Ryan was introduced as the new director of internal operations, and the room went quiet in a way that felt choreographed, like they'd already discussed him and agreed on a collective response of muted indifference. A man named Gerald Pratt, VP of Procurement, late 40s, the kind of guy who wore cufflinks that were probably older than Ryan's daughter, was the first to test the water. "So, Ryan, Olivia mentioned you'd be looking at operational efficiency. Can you give us a sense of your methodology? Walk the floor, read the data, ask questions. That's it? No framework? No diagnostic model? Frameworks are useful after you understand the problem. I don't understand the problem yet. Gerald exchanged a glance with Claire. It was quick, barely perceptible, but Ryan caught it. It said everything. Who is this guy? What is he doing here? How long before he's gone? Fair enough, Gerald said. I'm sure you'll find our processes are in pretty good shape. We run a tight ship in procurement. I'm sure you do. The meeting moved on. Ryan took notes, asked 2 more questions, both about vendor contracts in the logistics division, and left without saying anything provocative. But he could feel the weight of the room behind him as he walked out. He was being watched, measured, catalogued. He called Mrs. Kowalski during his lunch break that day, standing on a terrace overlooking the river, eating a sandwich he'd brought from home because he couldn't justify paying $14 for lettuce. How's Emma? She made a drawing of your office. She thinks you work in a castle. It kind of looks like a castle. She also wants to know if you have a sword. Tell her I have a laptop. It's basically the same thing. She won't buy that. I know. How are you holding up? I'm fine. I've been fine for 63 years. Stop asking. He hung up and looked at the river. The signing bonus had cleared that morning, $20,000, deposited into his checking account at 6:14 a.m. He'd stared at the number on his phone screen for a full minute, sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark, Emma still asleep in the next room. $20,000. He'd transferred $6,000 to the landlord immediately. Back rent, paid in full. Eviction notice, dead. Then he'd paid off the electric bill, the gas bill, and the minimum on 2 of the medical collections. He had $8,000 left, which was more money than he'd had in one place since before Jenna died. It didn't make him feel rich. It made him feel like a man standing on a ledge who'd been given a wider ledge. The ground was still a long way down. By the end of the second week, Ryan had visited every department in the building. He'd sat in on procurement meetings, logistics briefings, IT reviews, and 2 marketing presentations that were so full of buzzwords they could have been written by a random word generator. He'd filled 3 legal pads with notes. He'd started building a spreadsheet that tracked vendor payments across the logistics division, going back 18 months. The spreadsheet was where it got interesting. Bennett Dynamics used a network of shipping contractors to move medical supplies, equipment, and technology components between their clients. Hospitals, military installations, corporate warehouses. The logistics division managed these contracts, which involved hundreds of vendors, thousands of shipments, and millions of dollars flowing through the system every quarter. Ryan was good with numbers, not in an academic way. He'd never taken a statistics class, never studied regression analysis or Bayesian inference, but he'd spent 5 years doing route optimization for a shipping company, and he'd learned to see patterns in data the way a mechanic sees patterns in engine noise. Something was off. He could feel it before he could prove it. He started with the vendor list. Bennett Dynamics had 412 active vendors in their logistics network. Ryan pulled the payment history for each one and sorted them by total volume. The top 20 vendors accounted for 63% of all shipping costs. That was normal. Pareto distribution, the 80-20 rule in action. But when he looked at the growth rate for those top vendors, something jumped out. 3 of them, a company called Meridian Transit Solutions, another called Apex Freight Group, and a third called North Point Logistics Partners, had seen their billing increase by over 40% in the past year. Every other vendor was flat or growing in single digits. These 3 companies were pulling away from the pack, and nobody seemed to be asking why. Ryan dug deeper. He pulled the contract files for all 3 vendors and compared them to the industry benchmarks he'd memorized from his old job. The rates were high, not absurdly high, not high enough to trigger an automatic review, but consistently above market by 12 to 15%. The kind of premium you'd pay if you were desperate for capacity, or if you weren't paying close enough attention, or if someone had a reason to make sure these particular vendors got paid more than they should. He looked up the vendors themselves. Meridian Transit Solutions had a website that looked professionally designed but was thin on details. No photos of facilities, no employee directory, no client testimonials. Their registered address was a commercial mailbox in Schaumburg. Apex Freight Group was similar. Sleek website, sparse content, address in a strip mall in Naperville. North Point Logistics Partners didn't even have a website. Their registered agent was a law firm in the Loop that specialized in corporate formations. 3 vendors, 3 shell-looking companies, 40% billing increases, above market rates. Ryan sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. He'd seen this pattern before. Not at this scale. The shipping company he'd worked for was a fraction of Bennett Dynamics' size, but the shape was the same. Fake vendors, inflated invoices, money flowing out of the company and into pockets that had no business being near it. He should have gone straight to Olivia. That was the safe play, the corporate play. Flag the anomaly, hand it to the boss, let the people above him decide what to do. But Ryan had learned a long time ago that bringing a suspicion without evidence was the fastest way to get ignored, or worse, to get labeled as the new guy who sees conspiracies behind every spreadsheet. So he kept digging. Quietly, after hours mostly, when the 28th floor emptied out and the cleaning crew moved through the offices with their carts and vacuums. He'd stay at his desk until 7, sometimes 8, pulling records, cross-referencing invoices, building a map of where the money was going. The logistics division was run by a man named Carl Jennings, a career bureaucrat in his late 50s who'd been at the company for 20 years and seemed to operate on the principle that any system that hadn't broken down was a system that didn't need fixing. Carl was friendly enough in a distant, avuncular way, but he had the incurious eyes of someone who'd long since stopped looking at the numbers and started trusting the process. Ryan had met him twice. Both times, Carl had talked about golf. The person who actually signed off on the vendor contracts was the VP of Strategic Operations, Victor Hale. Ryan found Victor's signature on every Meridian invoice, on every Apex payment authorization, on every North Point billing approval. Victor, who'd walked into Ryan's office on his first day with that polished smile and told him they were all on the same team. Victor, whose suit cost more than Ryan's signing bonus. Victor, who'd been at Bennett Dynamics for 9 years and sat 3 seats from Olivia at every board meeting. 3 weeks into the job, Ryan had enough to be worried, but not enough to be certain. The vendors could be legitimate. The billing increases could be explained by market pressure. Victor's signatures could simply mean he was doing his job. But the pattern was there, steady and persistent, like a heartbeat under the floor. You couldn't see it, but if you got quiet enough, you could feel it. He needed more data. Specifically, he needed the delivery records, the actual shipping manifest that showed what was being transported, from where, and to whom. If the vendors were real, the manifest would confirm it. If the vendors were shells, the manifests would either be missing, fabricated, or wouldn't match the invoices. The delivery records were kept by the logistics department, which meant they were under Carl Jennings' jurisdiction. Ryan submitted a formal request through the company's internal system, citing his role and the scope of his operational review. The request was approved within 24 hours, standard procedure for someone with his access level. But when the files arrived, they were incomplete. Several months of records for all 3 suspicious vendors were simply missing. No explanation, no notation, just gaps. Ryan called Carl's office. "Those record?" Carl's voice was cheerful and unconcerned. "Yeah, we had a system migration about 8 months ago. Some of the older files didn't transfer cleanly. It's been working on recovering them, but honestly, it's not a priority. Nobody's asked for that stuff in years." "I'm asking now." Sure. I'll put in a ticket with IT. Might take a few weeks, though. You know how they are." Ryan hung up and sat very still. A system migration that conveniently lost records for the 3 vendors whose numbers didn't add up. It could be coincidence. It could be IT incompetence, which was always a possibility, or it could be something else. He decided to try a different approach. Instead of requesting the records through official channels, he went to the warehouse. Bennett Dynamics operated a distribution center on the south side of the city, a sprawling facility where incoming shipments were received, logged, and routed to their final destinations. If the vendors were real, someone at the warehouse would know them. Trucks would have arrived. People would have signed for deliveries. There would be a physical trail. He drove out on a Thursday afternoon, telling Diana he was conducting a site visit as part of his operational review. The warehouse manager was a stocky woman named Patrice Washington, who'd been running the facility for 12 years and had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent those years solving real problems while the executives downtown played with PowerPoint slides. "Director of Internal Operations," she said, reading his badge with raised eyebrows. "First time anyone from corporates visited in about 14 months. That's too long." "You're telling me. What do you need?" "I want to look at your receiving logs, specifically for 3 vendors: Meridian Transit Solutions, Apex Freight Group, and North Point Logistics Partners." Patrice's face did something complicated, a flicker of recognition followed by a careful blankness. "Those 3. Sure. Come on." She led him to a small office in the back of the warehouse where a row of filing cabinets held paper logs dating back years. The warehouse still used a hybrid system, digital for current records, paper for archives. Patrice pulled 3 folders and set them on the desk. "Here's the thing about those vendors," she said, leaning against a filing cabinet with her arms crossed. "I've been here 12 years. I know every regular driver by name. I know what their trucks look like, what time they usually show up, whether they take cream in their coffee. Meridian, Apex, and North Point, I can't tell you a single driver's name, can't tell you what their trucks look like, because most of the time nothing shows up." Ryan looked at her. "Nothing shows up?" "The invoices come through, the payments go out, but the actual deliveries, half the time there's no truck, no driver, no signature, or there's a signature, but it's from someone I've never seen, and the goods listed on the manifest don't match what I've got in the warehouse. Have you reported this?" Patrice let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "I've sent emails, I've flagged discrepancies, I've called the logistics department 4 different times. You know what I get back? Thanks for the heads up, Patrice. We'll look into it." That's it. Nobody looks into it. Nobody comes out here. Nobody asks. Until now. Until now. She studied him. "You're the guy who pulled the CEO out of traffic, right?" Word gets around. "In a company this size? Before lunch." She uncrossed her arms. "Look, I don't know what's going on with those vendors. I'm not an accountant. But I know when something smells wrong, and those 3 have smelled wrong for a long time. I keep my own records, paper, in this cabinet, where nobody from IT can accidentally lose them during a system migration." She tapped the cabinet with her knuckle. "You're welcome to them." Ryan spent 3 hours in Patrice's office, going through the paper logs page by page. The picture that emerged was damning. Over the past 18 months, Meridian, Apex, and North Point had been paid for deliveries that were either partially completed, completed with mismatched goods, or never completed at all. The total amount involved was hard to calculate without matching every invoice to every manifest, but Ryan's rough estimate put it somewhere north of $4 million. $4 million, flowing out of Bennett Dynamics and into 3 companies that barely existed, authorized by a man whose signature was on every check. Ryan drove back to the city in silence. His hands were tight on the steering wheel, and his mind was running through the same calculation it always ran in moments like these: cost and benefit, risk and reward. He could go to Olivia now. He had enough. The vendor analysis, the missing records, Patrice's testimony, the paper logs. It wasn't airtight. A good lawyer could poke holes in it. But it was enough to warrant an investigation, enough to justify bringing in outside auditors, enough to start pulling the thread. But Victor Hale was not a small target. He was a 9-year veteran of the company, a senior vice president, a man who sat on committees and played golf with board members and had connections that ran through the entire corporate hierarchy, like tree roots through soil. Going after Victor without ironclad evidence was not just risky. It was potentially career-ending, not for Victor, for Ryan. And career-ending for Ryan meant eviction notice again. It meant Emma counting coins under her bed again. It meant the free clinic and the cold water and the borrowed shirts and everything he'd just barely started to climb out of. He picked Emma up from Mrs. Kowalski's at 6:30. She was in a good mood. She'd made a friend at school, a girl named Maya who liked dinosaurs and had a hamster named Thunderbolt. "Thunderbolt is the best name for a hamster," Emma informed him over dinner. "Maya said I could come to her house and hold him." "That sounds great, Bug. Can I get a hamster?" "Let's start with keeping Professor Carrots alive." "Professor Carrots is stuffed. He can't die." "Tell that to his missing eye." She giggled, and the sound of it filled the apartment like sunlight. Ryan watched her eat her pasta. The real kind, not the store-brand stuff he'd been buying for 2 years, but the good kind, with actual sauce and fresh vegetables. And he thought about what he was sitting on. $4 million in fraud. A senior executive with his hands in the till. A company that had given Ryan a chance when nobody else would, run by a woman who'd told him to find what was broken. He'd found what was broken. And now he had to decide what to do about it. The decision was made for him 2 days later, in a way he hadn't expected. He was in his office on a Saturday afternoon. Emma was at Maya's house, her first real play date in months, and Ryan had used the empty hours to come in and continue his analysis. The 28th floor was deserted, the lights dimmed to their weekend setting, the usual hum of activity replaced by the kind of silence that big buildings produce when they're empty. Not quiet, exactly, but hollow, like the building was holding its breath. Ryan was deep in a spreadsheet when he heard the elevator chime, then footsteps in the corridor. Not the soft tread of a security guard doing rounds, but hard-soled shoes moving with purpose. He looked up and saw Victor Hale standing in his doorway. "Ryan." Victor's voice was the same, warm, modulated, the practiced ease of a man who controlled rooms for a living. But his eyes were different, sharper. The friendliness was still there, but it had a thin quality now, like a coat of paint over something harder. "Didn't expect to find anyone here on a Saturday. I'm catching up on reading." Victor stepped into the office and glanced at Ryan's screen. Ryan had already minimized the spreadsheet. Instinct, the same reflex that had made him cross the street when the parked car didn't look right. But the legal pad on his desk was still open, and the words Meridian, Apex, and North Point were written in block letters at the top of the page, circled twice. Victor's eyes landed on the notepad. He didn't react. No flinch, no tightening of the jaw, nothing that a casual observer would notice. But Ryan was not a casual observer. He'd been reading people his entire life, and he saw what Victor tried to hide. A flicker of recognition followed by a rapid, invisible recalculation. "Vendor analysis?" Victor asked lightly. "Part of the operational review." "Those 3 are mid-tier logistics contractors. Nothing particularly exciting about them." "Probably not." Victor sat down in the chair across from Ryan's desk. The same chair he'd sat in on Ryan's first day. The same casual confidence, the same air of a man who was exactly where he chose to be. But the energy was different. There was something watchful about it now, something that reminded Ryan of the way animals behave when they sense a threat. Still, attentive, coiled. "You know," Victor said, "I've been meaning to talk to you about your review. You've been thorough. Impressively so for someone who's only been here a month." "That's the job." "It is, but thoroughness can be, how to put this, misinterpreted. You start asking too many questions about vendor contracts, people get nervous. They think there's a witch hunt. It disrupts the workflow, creates anxiety. I've seen it happen before. I'm not hunting witches. Of course not. I'm just suggesting that context matters. Some of these vendor relationships go back years. They have nuances that don't show up in spreadsheets." He paused, and the pause was loaded, weighted with something Ryan could feel but couldn't quite name. "If you have questions about logistics vendors, come to me first. I can provide context that'll save you a lot of time." "I'll keep that in mind." Victor stood. "Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, Ryan." He walked to the door, then turned. "How's your daughter? Emma, right?" The mention of Emma's name hit Ryan like a cold hand on the back of his neck. It was casual, delivered with the same warmth as everything else Victor said. But there was no reason for Victor Hale to know his daughter's name. No reason at all. "She's fine," Ryan said. "Thanks." Victor nodded and left. Ryan listened to his footsteps recede down the corridor, heard the elevator chime, and sat motionless in his chair for a long time. Then he picked up the legal pad, tore off the top 3 pages, folded them, and put them in his jacket pocket. He closed his laptop, packed it in his bag, and left the building. He called Olivia that night from his kitchen, standing by the window, watching the streetlights come on one by one in the darkening neighborhood. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Ryan, it's Saturday night. I know I'm sorry, I need to talk to you about something and it can't wait until Monday. A pause. He heard music in the background. Something classical, quiet. Go ahead. He told her everything. The vendor analysis, the billing anomalies, the missing records, Patrice's testimony, the paper logs, the shell companies, and Victor's visit that afternoon. The too casual tone, the warning dressed up as advice, the mention of Emma's name. Olivia was silent for a long time after he finished. When she spoke, her voice was different, quieter, tighter, stripped of the professional confidence he'd come to expect. How much? At least 4 million, probably more. I haven't been able to trace all of it because the digital records have gaps. Convenient gaps. Yeah. Another silence. He could hear her breathing, could almost hear her thinking, processing the information, running the same cost-benefit analysis he'd been running for days. Victor's been with this company since before I became CEO, she said finally. He was my father's hire. He's on 3 board committees. He has relationships with half our major clients. I know. If you're wrong about this, if the evidence doesn't hold up, it won't just be your career that takes the hit. It'll be mine. I brought you in. I vouched for you. Everything you do reflects on my judgment. I know that too. And you're still telling me. You told me to find what's broken. This is broken. She was quiet again. Then, don't put anything else in the company system. No emails, no shared drives, nothing. Keep your research offline. Can you do that? Already started. I want to see everything you have. Monday morning, my office, 7 a.m., before anyone else is in the building. I'll be there. Ryan. Her voice caught on something. Not fear, not anger, but something rawer than either. Be careful. He's not just a fraud. If he's been doing this for years, he's been hiding it for years. People who hide that well don't do it passively. They protect themselves. He mentioned my daughter's name, casually, like it was nothing. The silence that followed was the longest yet. When Olivia spoke again, her voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness was something hard and cold, something that hadn't been there before. Monday, 7 a.m., bring everything. She hung up. Ryan stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, watching the last of the daylight bleed out of the sky. Emma was asleep in the next room. He could hear her breathing through the wall. Slow, even, the rhythm of absolute trust. She trusted him to keep her safe. She trusted the walls to hold. She trusted that tomorrow would be like today, and the day after would be like tomorrow, and all the days would add up to a childhood that made sense. He set the phone down, checked the lock on the front door, and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and the paper logs he'd photocopied from Patrice's files. The work was meticulous and slow, matching invoices to manifests, flagging discrepancies, building a case that would stand up not just to scrutiny, but to the kind of aggressive legal defense a man like Victor could afford. At midnight, he stopped. His eyes were burning. His hand, the one he'd scraped on the pavement a month ago, still ached when he typed for too long, a dull throb that reminded him of the morning that had started all of this. He closed the laptop, turned off the light, and went to check on Emma. She was sprawled across her bed in that boneless way children sleep, one arm flung over the edge, Professor Carrots wedged under her chin. Her face was smooth, unbothered, unmarked by anything more serious than the question of whether Thunderbolt the hamster preferred carrots or celery. Ryan adjusted her blanket, moved her arm back onto the bed, and stood in the doorway for a while, the way he always did. Then he went to bed and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, running the numbers one more time. $4 million, 3 shell companies, a 9-year executive with signatures on every page, and a single father with no business school degree and no political allies who was about to walk into a room and tell the CEO that one of her most trusted people was a thief. The signing bonus was spent. The eviction notice was gone. Emma had a friend named Maya and a hamster she was lobbying for. The borrowed shirt was in the trash, replaced by the blue button-down that had become Ryan's armor. The life he'd been building for 4 weeks was still fragile, still new, still standing on a foundation that could crack at the first hard blow. But the numbers didn't lie. The paper logs didn't lie. And Ryan Mercer, who'd learned to read people in parking lots and shipping docks and hospital hallways, who'd counted coins on a kitchen floor with a daughter who thought she was helping with the bills. Ryan Mercer wasn't going to lie either. He set his alarm for 5:30. Monday was coming, and he needed to be ready. Monday morning at 6:47 a.m., Ryan was standing outside Olivia's office with a manila folder thick enough to prop open a door and a laptop bag that weighed more than it should have because he'd printed backup copies of everything. Every spreadsheet, every invoice comparison, every page of Patrice's paper logs. He'd learned a long time ago that digital files could be deleted, corrupted, lost in convenient system migrations. Paper was harder to kill. Olivia arrived at 6:53, coffee in hand, wearing a dark blazer and the expression of someone who hadn't slept well. She unlocked her office without a word, held the door, and waited for him to sit before she closed it and pulled the blinds on the glass wall facing the corridor. "Show me," she said. Ryan opened the folder and laid it out. Vendor analysis first, then the billing comparisons, then the delivery logs from Patrice's files, then the corporate registration records for all three shell companies. He walked her through it the way he'd walked himself through it, methodically, without editorializing, letting the numbers do the talking. It took 40 minutes. Olivia didn't interrupt once. She turned pages, studied spreadsheets, asked for clarification on 2 data points, and drank her coffee with the focused intensity of a surgeon reviewing scans before an operation. When he finished, she sat back in her chair and stared at the documents spread across her desk. The silence lasted a full minute. Ryan counted. "The corporate registrations," she said finally. "Meridian, Apex, North Point, you said they all use the same registered agent. Same law firm, Hennessy and Associates, downtown. They specialize in corporate formations, LLCs, shell entities, that kind of thing. A lot of their clients are legitimate businesses. But 3 vendors all using the same obscure formation firm, all billing Bennett Dynamics at above-market rates, all showing delivery discrepancies. That's a pattern. Have you connected the shell companies to Victor directly, beyond his signatures on the invoices? Not yet. The corporate filings list nominee directors, placeholder names, probably hired off the street to sign papers. Tracing actual ownership requires subpoena power or forensic accounting, but the signatures are his, Olivia. Every approval, every payment authorization, hundreds of them over 18 months. He'd say he was just doing his job, approving what the logistics department submitted. He would, and Carl Jennings would say he submitted what the vendors invoiced, and the vendors would say they performed the services. That's the beauty of the setup. Every layer has plausible deniability, but the deliveries didn't happen. Patrice's logs prove that. She's got paper records showing trucks that never arrived, manifests for goods that never appeared in the warehouse, signatures from people who don't exist in any employee database. Patrice could be discredited. She's a warehouse manager, not an auditor. She's a warehouse manager with 12 years of spotless records and a filing cabinet full of evidence that nobody asked her for until I showed up. That's credibility, not vulnerability. Olivia rubbed her temples. It was a small gesture, unconscious, the kind of thing a person does when they're processing something they don't want to be true. $4 million. At minimum. That's just what I can document from the records I have access to. If Victor's been doing this longer than 18 months, and the pattern suggests he has, the real number could be twice that, maybe more. My father hired Victor. Her voice was flat, controlled, but Ryan heard what was underneath it. Not just anger, but a kind of betrayal that went deeper than money. He vouched for him. He trusted him with the operational backbone of this company. Victor sat at our dinner table. He came to my father's retirement party. He gave a speech. Ryan said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. He'd learned that from the hospital, from the months of sitting next to Jenna's bed while doctors delivered news that didn't improve. Sometimes silence was the only honest response. "What do you recommend?" Olivia asked. "Bring in an outside forensic accounting firm, not one that has any existing relationship with Bennett Dynamics. Give them everything I've compiled plus full access to the financial systems. Lock Victor's access to the payment authorization system without telling him. Make it look like a routine security update. And put a hold on all pending payments to the 3 vendors, effective immediately. If I lock his access, he'll know. He already knows. He came to my office Saturday. He saw the vendor names on my notepad. He told me to bring questions about logistics vendors to him first. which is exactly what someone running this kind of operation would say. Control the flow of information, keep the investigator inside the tent. And he mentioned Emma. Yeah, he mentioned Emma. Olivia's jaw tightened. It was subtle, but Ryan saw it. A hardening, a decision being made behind her eyes. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city waking up below them. Morning light was hitting the river, turning it silver. I'm going to make a call, she said. I have a contact at Thornton Graves. They're a forensic accounting firm out of New York, no ties to anyone in our network. I'll have them here by Wednesday. She turned back to face him. In the meantime, I need you to do two things. First, make a complete copy of everything you have and put it somewhere secure. Not in this building, not on any company server. Already done. Flash drive, safety deposit box at my bank. She almost smiled. Almost. Second thing, watch your back. I'm not being dramatic. Victor has allies on this floor. People who owe him favors, people whose positions depend on the status quo. If he suspects you're building a case, he's not going to sit still. I don't sit still either. I noticed. She paused, and something in her expression shifted. Not warmer exactly, but less guarded, as though a wall she maintained out of professional necessity had lowered by an inch. Ryan, I want you to know what you've done here, bringing this forward, taking the risk. It matters. Most people in your position would have looked the other way. Most people in my position can't afford to look the other way. I've got a daughter who needs me employed and alive in that order. If this company goes down because someone's stealing millions, I'm the first one out the door. I'm protecting myself as much as anyone. That's a very practical way to look at it. I'm a very practical person. She nodded. Monday, 7 a.m. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I know. He gathered his documents and left. The corridor was still empty. It was barely 7:30, and the executive floor didn't fill up until close to 9. Ryan walked to the elevator, wrote it down to 28, and sat at his desk. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. But underneath the clarity, something was buzzing. The low-frequency hum of a fight that was about to start, the kind you can feel in your bones before the first punch lands. The next 2 days were a performance. Ryan went to meetings, attended briefings, asked questions about workflow efficiency and departmental budgets, all the things a director of internal operations was supposed to be doing. He made eye contact with Victor in a hallway on Tuesday and received the same polished smile, the same easy nod. Nothing had changed on the surface. Underneath, everything had changed. The forensic accountants arrived Wednesday morning, 2 women and a man, all wearing the same bland business attire, all carrying the same kind of unassuming briefcases that belied the precision of what they did. Olivia introduced them to Ryan in a conference room on the 33rd floor, a room that wasn't normally used and had been booked under the name of a fictitious compliance review. The lead auditor was a woman named Sarah Chen, early 40s, sharp eyes, a handshake that was all business. She listened to Ryan's briefing with the attentiveness of someone who'd heard variations of this story many times and was already sorting the facts into categories. The paper trail from the warehouse is strong, Sarah said when he finished. The delivery logs alone are enough to establish that services weren't rendered. Combined with the billing analysis and the shell company registrations, we have a solid foundation, but we need to establish the money's destination. Where did it go after it left Bennett Dynamics? That's where I hit the wall, Ryan admitted. I don't have subpoena power, and the bank records for the vendor accounts aren't public. We do, Sarah said. Or rather, we can compel them through the audit. Once Olivia authorizes a full forensic review under the company's own bylaws, we can trace fund flows through the vendor accounts. If the money circles back to anyone inside the company, or to accounts connected to anyone inside the company, we'll find it. How long? 2 weeks for preliminary findings, 4 to 6 for a complete trace. She paused. In the meantime, whoever's behind this is going to feel the heat. These things don't stay quiet. People talk. IT logs get reviewed. Someone notices that payment authorizations have been rerouted. You should be prepared for pushback. I'm always prepared for pushback. Good, because in my experience, the pushback is where it gets interesting. The pushback came sooner than anyone expected, and it didn't come from Victor. Thursday afternoon, Ryan was called to a meeting with Gerald Pratt, the VP of Procurement, who'd questioned his methodology in the departmental review. The meeting was in Gerald's office, a corner suite on the 30th floor, decorated with the kind of artwork that screamed wealth and taste in equal measure. Gerald was standing when Ryan arrived, hands in his pockets, looking out the window with the casual authority of a man who'd been standing in expensive offices his entire career. "Close the door," Gerald said. Ryan closed it. "I'm going to be blunt with you," Gerald said, turning from the window. "There are people on this floor who are concerned about the scope of your review." "Which people?" "People who matter. Board members, department heads, senior staff. The consensus is that your role was meant to be an efficiency audit, process improvements, cost optimization, that kind of thing. Not a forensic investigation into vendor relationships that have been in place for years. My role is to find what's broken." Olivia was clear about that. Olivia is the CEO. She has a big picture perspective, but this company runs on relationships. Vendor relationships, board relationships, departmental trust. When a new hire with no corporate experience starts pulling financial records and visiting warehouses and raising questions about established contracts, it creates instability. People feel targeted. Are they being targeted? Gerald's eyes narrowed. That's exactly the kind of question that makes people nervous. Gerald, I'm doing the job I was hired to do. If the vendor contracts are clean, my review will confirm that, and everyone can relax. If they're not clean, then someone should be nervous. But it shouldn't be me. That's a nice speech, very righteous, but you should understand something. Gerald stepped closer, lowering his voice in a way that was meant to convey confidentiality but felt more like a threat. Victor Hale has been the operational heartbeat of this company for nearly a decade. He has relationships with our biggest clients, our most important board members, and the people who approve budgets and promotions. If your review creates the impression that Victor is under investigation, whether that's true or not, the consequences will extend far beyond your little glass office on 28. Is that a warning? It's context, the kind of context that someone without a business degree might not have. Ryan felt the heat rise in his chest. Not anger, not exactly, but something close to it, something that had been building since his first week in this building. The condescension, the careful coded reminders that he didn't belong. The assumption that because he hadn't gone to the right school or worn the right suit or learned the right handshake, he couldn't possibly understand the delicate mechanics of corporate power. Gerald, he said quietly, I appreciate the context, and I want you to understand mine. I have a 5-year-old daughter who depends on me. I have bills that don't care about my pedigree. I came to this company because I was given a chance, and I intend to honor that chance by doing exactly what I was asked to do, honestly and thoroughly. If that makes people nervous, maybe they should ask themselves why. Gerald stared at him for a long moment. Then he straightened his cuffs, a deliberate dismissive gesture that probably worked on junior analysts, and nodded toward the door. We're done here. Ryan left without another word. In the elevator, he pulled out his phone and texted Olivia 2 words. Gerald knows. Her response came 90 seconds later. Expected. Stay the course. He stayed the course, but the course was getting harder. That evening, he picked Emma up from after-school care. She'd started going 3 days a week since Ryan's hours at the office had lengthened, and took her to the park near their apartment. The weather had turned cold, real cold, the kind of November chill that reached through coats and settled in your joints. Emma didn't care. She ran for the swings like the temperature was a suggestion, and Ryan sat on a bench and watched her fly, back and forth, her laughter cutting through the wind. His phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Mercer. A man's voice. Deep, professional, unfamiliar. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm an attorney with Cahill and Sterling. I represent Victor Hale. Ryan's stomach dropped. Not because he was surprised, he'd been expecting something like this since Saturday, but because the speed of it meant Victor was scared. Scared people with lawyers were more dangerous than confident people without them. What can I do for you, Mr. Webb? My client has become aware that certain inquiries are being made into vendor relationships under his purview. He wants you to know that he considers these inquiries to be groundless and potentially defamatory, and that any continued investigation without proper legal authorization could expose both you and Bennett Dynamics to significant liability. Is that a legal opinion or a personal one? It's a formal notice. I'm sending a cease and desist letter to your office tomorrow morning. I'd encourage you to retain counsel before taking any further action. I'll keep that in mind. Anything else? Mr. Mercer, I'm giving you professional advice, which I rarely do for free. Walk away from this. Whatever you think you've found, you haven't found enough. The people involved in this situation have resources and relationships that you do not. This is not a fight you can win. Thanks for the advice. Take it. Ryan hung up and sat very still on the bench. Emma was still on the swings, calling out to him, "Daddy, watch! Watch how high!" And he waved and smiled and said, "I see you, Bug," while his mind ran through the implications of what had just happened. Victor had lawyered up. That meant Victor knew the investigation was real, not just Ryan poking around, which meant someone had told him. Gerald was the obvious candidate, but it could have been anyone. The IT department, someone in finance who'd noticed the payment holds, even someone on Olivia's staff. Information in a company this size moved like water, finding the cracks in every wall, seeping through every barrier. He called Olivia from the apartment after Emma was in bed. She listened without interrupting, then asked for the attorney's name and firm. "Cahill and Sterling," she said. "They're corporate defense specialists, expensive ones. If Victor's hired them, he's not just playing defense, he's building a counterattack. The cease and desist is theater. He can't stop a CEO-authorized audit. He knows that. The letter isn't for us, it's for the board. He's going to frame this as a witch hunt, a new, inexperienced hire overstepping his authority, making unfounded accusations against a senior executive. He'll claim you have a personal grudge, or that you're trying to impress me, or that you're out of your depth. Then he'll demand that the board intervene and shut down the review. Can they do that? Technically, the board can override me on a compliance matter if they vote to do so. It would take a 2/3 majority. Victor has allies, but I don't think he has 2/3. Not yet. Not yet. Which means we need to move faster. Sarah's team needs to accelerate the fund trace. If we can show the board where the money actually went, bank accounts and names, before Victor can rally his supporters, the case makes itself. And if we can't, then it becomes a political fight instead of a financial one. And political fights in corporate boardrooms are decided by relationships, not evidence. Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter. The apartment was quiet. The only sound, the tick of the radiator and Emma's breathing from the next room. I got a call from a lawyer threatening me. Gerald Pratt told me to back off. Victor's building a coalition on the board, and I'm sitting in a kitchen in a neighborhood where the hot water doesn't work, trying to take down a guy who probably makes more in a month than I've made in 5 years. Tell me I'm not crazy. You're not crazy. You're the only person in this company who had the guts to look at the numbers and say something. That's not crazy. That's exactly what I hired you for. That's what you keep saying. Because it keeps being true. He almost smiled. I need something from you, Olivia, and I need you to not ask why. What is it? Access to Victor's travel records, company-funded trips over the past 2 years, flights, hotels, expense reports. A pause. Why? You said not to ask. I said I'd try. I'm failing. Why? Because a man running a $4 million fraud doesn't do it from a desk in Chicago. He's got to meet people. The registered agents, the bank contacts, whoever's on the other end of the shell companies. If his travel pattern matches the locations of the vendor registrations, that's another thread to pull. Silence. Then, I'll have Diana pull the records tomorrow, discreetly. Thank you. Ryan? Her voice had that quality again, the one from Saturday night, raw and careful, like someone walking on ice and trying not to look down. Are you okay? Not the investigation. You. I'm fine. That's not an answer. It's the answer I've got. She let it go. They hung up, and Ryan stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of everything he was carrying, but the investigation, the threats, Emma's trust, his own fear, settle onto his shoulders like something physical. He was tired. Not sleepy tired, bone tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix because it comes from a place deeper than the body. He made himself eat something, leftover pasta, cold, standing at the counter, and then he sat at the table and opened his laptop. The screen glowed in the dark kitchen, and he pulled up the spreadsheet again, the one with the vendor payments and the delivery logs and the gaps that told a story nobody wanted to hear. He worked until 1 in the morning. Then he went to bed and set his alarm for 5:30, because Monday was over but Tuesday was coming, and Victor Hale's lawyer was sending a letter, and the board was watching, and somewhere in this city, a man with a 9-year head start was figuring out how to make Ryan Mercer disappear. The cease and desist arrived Friday morning. It was 6 pages of legal language that boiled down to a single message: stop, or we'll destroy you. Ryan read it twice, put it in the folder with everything else, and went back to work. Diana delivered Victor's travel records that afternoon, a printout so long it came in 3 sections, stapled separately. Ryan spent the weekend going through them. Victor traveled frequently: client visits, industry conferences, board meetings in other cities. Most of it was routine, but 3 trips jumped out. A trip to Schaumburg 8 months ago. Duration, 4 hours. No client meeting listed, no conference, just a hotel room and a rental car. Schaumburg was where Meridian Transit Solutions had its registered address, the commercial mailbox in a strip mall. A trip to Naperville 6 months ago. Same pattern. Short duration, no documented purpose, hotel and car. Naperville was where Apex Freight Group was registered, and a trip to a small town in Indiana 4 months ago, where North Point Logistics Partners had its registered agent. 3 hours. No client, no conference, just Victor Hale driving to a place that had no connection to Bennett Dynamics, except through a ghost company that didn't deliver goods and didn't have a website. Ryan added the travel records to the folder and called Sarah Chen. "I need you to cross-reference these dates with the fund flows," he told her. "Specifically, check if any transfers were made to or from the vendor accounts within 48 hours of each trip. That's going to require access to the vendor bank records. We're still waiting on the authorization. How much longer?" "Olivia's legal team is working on it. Could be a few more days." "We might not have a few more days." "What do you mean?" "Victor's moving. He's got a lawyer sending threats. He's got allies on the board asking questions. If he gets to the board before we get to the bank records, he can frame this whole thing as an unauthorized investigation and shut it down." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Then we need to give the board something they can't ignore. Something that makes the case on its own, without the bank records." "Like what?" "Like proof that the deliveries didn't happen. Not statistical analysis, not pattern matching, actual proof. Manifests that were fabricated. Signatures that were forged. Goods that were invoiced but never existed." "Patrice has that. Her paper logs show dozens of phantom deliveries." "Patrice's logs are strong, but they're internal records from a warehouse manager. A defense attorney will argue they could be inaccurate, incomplete, biased. What I need is external corroboration. If Bennett Dynamics was supposedly receiving shipments from these vendors, there should be records on the other end too. Carrier logs, bill of lading numbers, port of entry stamps if any goods crossed state lines. If those records don't exist, the case writes itself. How do we get external carrier records? Through the Department of Transportation. Any licensed freight carrier has to file operating authority and maintain trip records. If Meridian, Apex, and North Point are licensed carriers, their records will be on file. If they're not licensed, if they don't exist as actual carriers, then every invoice they've submitted is fraudulent on its face." Ryan felt something click in his chest, the sound of a puzzle piece finding its place. "How fast can you check that?" "I can run the DOT query tonight. Motor carrier records are public." "Do it. Call me the second you have results." Sarah called at 11:47 p.m. Ryan was in bed, not sleeping. He hadn't been sleeping well since Victor's Saturday visit, and he picked up on the first ring. "None of them," Sarah said. Her voice had the flat, controlled tone of someone delivering a verdict. "Meridian Transit Solutions, Apex Freight Group, North Point Logistics Partners. None of them have motor carrier authority. None of them have operating licenses. None of them are registered with the Department of Transportation as freight carriers, brokers, or any other category. As far as the federal government is concerned, these companies don't transport anything. They've never transported anything. They're registered LLCs with commercial mailbox addresses and no operational infrastructure. Ryan sat up in bed. I'm saying that Bennett Dynamics has paid over $4 million to 3 companies that legally cannot and do not perform the services they invoiced. Every delivery manifest bearing their names is fabricated. Every signature is fictitious. Every dollar they received was money for nothing. That's it. That's the case. It's enough for the board. And it's enough for criminal referral if Olivia wants to go that route. A pause. Ryan, there's one more thing. When I ran the DOT queries, I also checked the corporate registration histories. All 3 LLCs were formed within a 60-day window, 3 years ago. Same formation firm, same registered agent, same filing pattern. And I found something in the formation documents, a signature on the operating agreements that matches a name in Bennett Dynamics employee directory. Whose name? Not Victor's. Someone named Thomas Briggs. He's listed as a financial analyst in the logistics division. Level 3, no direct reports. Reports to Carl Jennings. I've never heard of him. That might be the point. He's the invisible man. Low level enough to avoid scrutiny, positioned close enough to the financial systems to create vendor accounts and process invoices. If Victor's the architect, Thomas Briggs is the plumber. He's the one who actually built the pipes. Ryan was already out of bed, pulling on a sweatshirt, heading for the kitchen table and his laptop. Can you send me everything? The DOT results, the formation documents, the Briggs connection? Already in your inbox. Encrypted, like we discussed. Thank you, Sarah. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive the board meeting. Ryan opened his laptop and spent the next 2 hours reviewing Sarah's findings. The evidence was clear, comprehensive, and devastating. 3 fake companies. No operational capacity. Millions in fraudulent payments. A paper trail that connected through a low-level analyst to the logistics division run by a man who didn't ask questions and overseen by a senior vice president who signed every check. At 2 a.m, Ryan closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The apartment was silent. Emma was sleeping. The radiator ticked its slow, patient rhythm. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far away, the sound of someone else's emergency moving through the city. He thought about what Marcus Webb had said on the phone. This is not a fight you can win. He thought about Gerald Pratt standing in his corner office with his expensive artwork, telling Ryan that the consequences would extend far beyond his little glass office on 28. He thought about Victor's smile, polished and warm, and hiding something that had been eating this company alive for years. They were all betting on the same thing, that Ryan Mercer, the outsider, the guy without the degree, the single father from a neighborhood where the hot water didn't work, would do what reasonable people do when the powerful close ranks. They were betting he'd back down. They didn't know him. They didn't know what he'd survived. They didn't know that a man who'd held his wife's hand while she died, who'd told his daughter that mommy wasn't coming home, who'd counted coins on a kitchen floor and ironed borrowed shirts and run into traffic without thinking. That man didn't back down. Not because he was brave, not because he was righteous, but because he'd already lost the worst thing he could lose, and everything after that was just math. He set his alarm for 5:30. Tomorrow he'd call Olivia. Tomorrow they'd prepare for the board. Tomorrow the fight would begin in earnest. But tonight, in the quiet of his apartment, with his daughter breathing softly through the wall and the evidence locked in his laptop, and the city humming its dark, restless song outside the window, Ryan Mercer allowed himself one moment of something that wasn't fear and wasn't anger, and wasn't the cold-eyed calculation of a man under siege. It was certainty. The quiet, unshakable certainty of a man who knew the truth and was willing to stand behind it, no matter who stood against him. He went to bed. He slept. And when the alarm went off at 5:30, he was already awake, already dressed, already reaching for the phone to make the call that would set everything in motion. Olivia answered on the second ring, and Ryan didn't waste time with pleasantries. Sarah found it. All 3 vendors. No motor carrier authority, no DOT registration, no operating licenses. They're empty shells. Every invoice they've submitted is for services they legally cannot perform. And there's a name, Thomas Briggs, financial analyst in logistics. His signature is on the formation documents for all 3 companies. Silence on the line. Then Olivia's voice, quiet and precise. Thomas Briggs. I don't know that name. Nobody does. That's the design. He's buried 3 layers down in Carl Jennings' department, low enough to be invisible, close enough to the payment systems to process everything. Victor signs off from the top. Briggs feeds from the bottom. Carl sits in the middle not asking questions, probably because nobody's given him a reason to ask. Or because he's been told not to. That's possible too. How fast can Sarah have a formal report ready? She says 48 hours for a board-ready summary. But Olivia, we might not have 48 hours. What do you mean? Victor hired a defense attorney 3 days ago. Gerald Pratt cornered me and told me to back off. If Victor's reading the situation correctly, and he's smart enough to be reading it correctly, he knows the noose is tightening. People in that position do one of 2 things. They surrender or they destroy the evidence. Another silence, longer this time. What evidence is still inside the company? The digital records, invoices, payment logs, authorization files, everything in the financial system. I've got copies of the critical documents, and Patrice has her paper logs at the warehouse. But the original digital records are still on the company servers. If Victor has any kind of administrative access, or if Briggs does, they could start deleting files tonight. I'll have IT lock down the financial servers. Read-only access for everyone except Sarah's team. Do it now, not tomorrow. Now. It's 6 in the morning, Ryan. And Victor's lawyer called me at 4 in the afternoon on a weekday to threaten me. These people aren't operating on a 9-to-5 schedule. He heard her exhale, a sharp, frustrated sound. All right, I'm calling IT. I'll have the lockdown in place within the hour. A pause. Ryan, there's something else. The board chair called me last night, Margaret Ashworth. She said Victor requested an emergency session to discuss what he's calling irregularities in the operational review process. He wants it on the agenda for Friday. Friday, that's 3 days. 2.5. He's trying to get ahead of us. If he can convince the board that your investigation is unauthorized or procedurally flawed, he can push for a vote to suspend the audit. Can he win that vote? I don't know. Margaret's cautious. She won't take sides without seeing evidence. But Victor's been cultivating board relationships for 9 years. I've been CEO for 2. If it comes down to political capital, he has more of it. Then we don't let it come down to politics. We bring the evidence to the board before Victor can frame the narrative. Can you get me on the agenda for Friday? You? Personally? Me. In the room, presenting the findings. Not a written report they can skim and dismiss. A face-to-face presentation where I walk them through every dollar, every fake vendor, every phantom delivery. Make them look at it. The board is 12 people, Ryan. Half of them have known Victor longer than they've known me. You'll be walking into a room full of people who are predisposed to believe him and predisposed to dismiss you. I know. You'll be a director-level hire with 6 weeks of tenure, accusing a senior vice president of criminal fraud in front of the company's governing body. If the evidence doesn't hold, if there's even one gap they can exploit, you're done. Not just at Bennett Dynamics. Everywhere, Victor's lawyer will make sure of that. I know all of that. And you still want to do it. I don't want to do it. I have to do it. Because if I don't, Victor goes into that boardroom with his 9-year reputation and his expensive attorney and his carefully rehearsed story about the overzealous new hire, and the board gives him the benefit of the doubt, and the audit gets killed, and the money keeps disappearing, and nothing changes. Olivia was quiet. He could hear her thinking, not just about the strategy, but about him, about the kind of man who'd say what he'd just said and mean every word of it. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, not uncertain. Olivia Bennett didn't do uncertain, but something closer to human. Friday, I'll get you on the agenda, but Ryan, prepare like your life depends on it. It does. He hung up and stood in the kitchen, watching the first gray light of morning creep across the apartment floor. Emma's alarm would go off in 30 minutes. He had 30 minutes to be afraid, and then he had to be her father, making breakfast, packing her lunch, walking her to the bus stop with a smile that didn't betray anything. 29 minutes. He used them all. The next 2 days blurred together in a way that reminded Ryan of the weeks after Jenna's diagnosis. The same compressed intensity, the same feeling of moving through time at a different speed than everyone around him. He worked. He prepared. He built his presentation with the obsessive precision of a man who understood that every number, every chart, every word had to be unassailable. Sarah Chen sent her preliminary report Tuesday evening, a 40-page document that traced the fraud from its origins 3 years ago through the present day. The total had grown. What Ryan had initially estimated at $4 million was now closer to $6.2 million, spread across hundreds of fraudulent invoices, all routed through the same 3 shell companies, all bearing Victor Hale's authorization signature. The Briggs connection was solid. Thomas Briggs had been hired at Bennett Dynamics 4 years ago, 1 year before the shell companies were formed. His resume listed a degree from a university that had no record of his enrollment. His previous employer, a small accounting firm in downstate Illinois, had closed 2 years before Briggs supposedly left. The man was a fiction, a construct designed to sit inside the system and process fraudulent payments without attracting attention. "We still can't prove Victor created Briggs," Sarah told Ryan during a phone call Wednesday night. "There's no direct link, no emails, no texts, no paper trail connecting Victor to Briggs's hiring or to the shell company formations. The connection is circumstantial. Victor signs the invoices. Briggs processes the payments. The shell companies receive the funds. But a good defense attorney will argue that Victor was simply approving what came across his desk, that he had no knowledge of the underlying fraud." What about the travel records? The trips to Schaumburg, Naperville, Indiana, all matching the vendor registration addresses? Helpful, but not conclusive. Victor could say he was visiting clients, scouting locations, anything. Without the bank records showing money flowing from the vendor accounts back to Victor personally, the case against him specifically relies on inference. Then we make the inference overwhelming. Stack enough circumstantial evidence and inference becomes the only reasonable conclusion. That works in a courtroom. In a boardroom, it works only if the people in the room want to believe it. Then I'll make them want to believe it. He spent Thursday night at the kitchen table with his laptop, rehearsing the presentation out loud. He walked through the timeline, the vendor analysis, the DOT findings, the Briggs connection, the travel records, the warehouse logs. He practiced answering every question he could anticipate. The hostile ones, the skeptical ones, the ones designed to trip him up or make him look like an amateur playing detective. Emma came out of her room at 10 o'clock, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, who are you talking to?" "Myself." "That's weird." "I know, Bug. Go back to bed." "Are you practicing for something?" "Sort of. It's a work thing." She padded over and climbed onto his lap, ignoring his protest that it was past her bedtime. She looked at the laptop screen at spreadsheets, charts, numbers she couldn't possibly understand, and then she looked at him. "Are you scared?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. Not because it was surprising. Emma had an uncanny ability to read him, the same ability Jenna had possessed, but because the answer was complicated and she was 5 and he didn't want to lie to her. "A little," he said. "Mommy said being scared is okay. She said it means you care about something." "When did she say that?" "When she was in the hospital. I told her I was scared and she said it's okay because it means I cared about her getting better." Ryan held his daughter and said nothing for a long time. The laptop hummed. The radiator ticked. Outside, the city moved through its restless night, and inside the apartment, a father and his daughter sat in a pool of kitchen light and held on to each other. "You should go to bed," he said finally. "You should too." "Deal." He carried her back to her room, tucked her in, placed Professor Carrots in his designated spot under her chin, and stood in the doorway. She was asleep in minutes, the effortless, absolute sleep of a child who trusts the world to still be there in the morning. Ryan went back to the kitchen, closed the laptop, and went to bed. He did not sleep well, but he slept enough. Friday morning arrived the way a trial date arrives, with a weight that you've been carrying for days suddenly becoming immediate, physical, present. Ryan put on the blue button-down, pressed sharp enough to cut. He shaved carefully around the scrape on his jaw, which had faded to a faint mark but was still visible if you knew where to look. He checked his bandaged hand, nearly healed now, just a thin scab across the palm, and flexed his fingers. They worked fine. Everything worked fine. He was ready. Mrs. Kowalski met him at the door at 7:15. "You look like you're going to war," she said. "Something like that." "When?" He took the train downtown, walked into the Bennett Dynamics Tower, rode the elevator to the 34th floor, the executive boardroom level, and stepped into a corridor that smelled like fresh coffee and expensive wood polish. The boardroom doors were closed. Through the frosted glass, he could see shapes moving, people taking their seats, pouring water, arranging papers, the machinery of corporate governance winding up for another session. Olivia was waiting for him outside the doors. She was wearing black, blazer, blouse, heels, all of it sharp and deliberate, the visual equivalent of body armor. Her face was composed, but her eyes were active, scanning Ryan the way a general scans a field before an engagement. "How are you feeling?" "Focused." "Good." The board's been in session for 20 minutes. Victor presented first. He asked for the opening slot, and Margaret granted it. He's been laying groundwork. Unauthorized investigation, procedural overreach, a new hire exceeding his authority. He's smooth, Ryan. He's very, very smooth. I know. He brought his attorney, Marcus Webb. He's sitting in the gallery as an observer. It's legal. Board rules allow members to bring counsel to emergency sessions. Fine. Let him watch. Margaret will introduce you. You'll have 30 minutes to present, then they'll open the floor for questions. Victor will be in the room. He'll challenge you. Be ready. I've been ready since 5:30 this morning. Olivia nodded. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and straightened his tie. It was a quick, instinctive gesture, the kind of thing you do for someone you care about without thinking about it. She caught herself, pulled her hand back, and for just a moment, the CEO mask slipped and Ryan saw the woman underneath, tired, worried, carrying a weight that she couldn't share with anyone because the company was her inheritance and its failures felt personal. Thank you, she said, for all of it. Save the thank you for after. Noted. She opened the boardroom doors and Ryan walked in. The room was large, long oval table, 12 leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The board members were already seated, a collection of faces that ranged from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. Gerald Pratt was there, his expression carefully neutral. Claire Ashford was there, her smile fixed in place like a decorative feature. Margaret Ashworth, the board chair, a silver-haired woman in her 70s with the posture of a ballet dancer and the eyes of an accountant, sat at the head of the table with a legal pad and a fountain pen. And Victor Hale sat 3 seats from the head, leaning back in his chair with the relaxed posture of a man who'd been in this room 100 times and knew every sightline, every political current, every unspoken rule. His attorney, Marcus Webb, a compact man in a dark suit with the watchful stillness of a courtroom professional, sat against the wall behind him. Ryan walked to the presentation area at the front of the room. He set his folder on the lectern, opened his laptop, and connected it to the display screen. He took a breath. Not deep, not dramatic, just a breath, the kind a man takes before he lifts something heavy. Good morning, Margaret said. Mr. Mercer, you've been added to the agenda at the CEO's request. You have 30 minutes. Please proceed. Ryan looked at the room. 12 faces, 12 people who held his career, and by extension, his daughter's future, in their hands. Some of them had already decided he didn't belong here. Some of them had already decided he was wrong. He was going to change their minds, or he was going to fail trying. 6 weeks ago, he began, I was hired to identify operational inefficiencies at Bennett Dynamics. In the course of that review, I discovered a pattern of financial irregularities in the logistics division that, upon investigation, proved to be a systematic fraud totaling approximately $6.2 million over the past 3 years. The room went still. Not quiet. It had been quiet before. But still, the way air goes still before a storm. The fraud operates through 3 vendor companies, Meridian Transit Solutions, Apex Freight Group, and North Point Logistics Partners. These companies have been billing Bennett Dynamics for freight and shipping services. They have been paid millions of dollars, and they do not exist. He clicked to the first slide, the DOT registration search results. None of these companies hold motor carrier authority. None are licensed by the Department of Transportation as freight carriers. They have no trucks, no drivers, no warehouses, no operational capacity of any kind. They are registered LLCs with commercial mailbox addresses and nominee directors, created for the sole purpose of receiving fraudulent payments from this company. Victor shifted in his chair. It was minimal, a slight adjustment of posture, a recrossing of legs, but Ryan caught it the way he caught everything, from the corner of his eye, without looking directly. The invoices submitted by these vendors describe shipments that never occurred. I have delivery logs from our own warehouse facility. He clicked to the next slide, documenting dozens of instances where goods invoiced by these vendors were never received. No trucks arrived. No drivers signed in. No cargo was logged. The warehouse manager, Patrice Washington, who has served this company for 12 years with an impeccable record, flagged these discrepancies multiple times through internal channels. Her reports were acknowledged and ignored. He walked them through the billing analysis, the above-market rates, the 40% growth spikes, the consistent pattern of overcharging that, spread across hundreds of invoices, added up to millions. He showed them the corporate formation records. All three companies created within 60 days, all using the same law firm, all bearing the signature of Thomas Briggs, a man whose employment credentials didn't survive basic verification. Thomas Briggs was hired as a financial analyst in the logistics division 4 years ago, Ryan said. His resume lists a degree from an institution that has no record of his enrollment. His previous employer closed 2 years before he supposedly left. His role within the company placed him in a position to create vendor accounts and process payment authorizations. He is the operational mechanism through which the fraudulent invoices entered the system. Margaret Ashworth was writing on her legal pad, her fountain pen moving in steady, precise strokes. 2 other board members were leaning forward. Gerald Pratt's neutral expression had cracked slightly, not toward belief, not toward disbelief, but toward the uncomfortable middle ground of a man watching something he can't control. Every payment authorization for these 3 vendors bears the same executive signature, Ryan said, and he clicked to the final slide, a grid showing Victor Hale's name over and over, on invoice after invoice, payment after payment, quarter after quarter. The senior vice president of strategic operations approved every dollar that left this company and entered accounts controlled by entities that do not perform the services they billed for. He stopped. He closed the laptop. He looked at the room. "I'm not an attorney," he said. "I'm not a forensic accountant. I'm a director-level employee with 6 weeks of tenure and a background that most people in this room would consider unremarkable. I know that. I know what I look like standing here, but the numbers don't care about my resume. The DOT records don't care about my pedigree. And the $6.2 million that has been stolen from this company doesn't care whether the person who found it went to Stanford or a state school." He paused. The room was absolutely still. "I came to Bennett Dynamics because Ms. Bennett gave me a chance. She told me to find what was broken. I found it. What you do with that information is your decision. But I want you to understand something. I didn't bring this to you because I have an agenda or a grudge or something to prove. I brought it because it's the truth, and this company deserves to know it." He stepped back from the lectern. Margaret Ashworth looked up from her legal pad. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. The floor is now open for questions." Victor Hale spoke first. Of course he did. He'd been waiting, coiled in his chair like a spring, and when he spoke, his voice was the same warm, controlled instrument Ryan had heard on his first day, the voice of a man who moved through rooms like he owned them. "Margaret, if I may." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "I appreciate Mr. Mercer's presentation. It's thorough, I'll give him that. But there are significant problems with both his methodology and his conclusions, and the board deserves to hear them." He looked at Ryan. The smile was gone. In its place was something harder, more honest, the real face beneath the polish. First, the vendor relationships Mr. Mercer has identified are legitimate business arrangements that have been in place for years. The companies in question provide specialized logistics services through subcontracted carriers, a common practice in the freight industry that Mr. Mercer, with his limited experience, may not be familiar with. "Those companies have no motor carrier authority," Ryan said, "because they don't need it. They're brokers, not carriers. They coordinate shipments through licensed third parties. The fact that they don't appear in the DOT carrier registry simply means they operate in a different regulatory category. They don't appear in the broker registry either, Ryan said. I checked. They're not registered as brokers, carriers, or freight forwarders. They have no DOT presence of any kind. Victor's jaw tightened, but his recovery was fast. The practiced reflexes of a man who'd been deflecting hard questions for years. Regulatory filings can be delayed. It's not unusual for smaller firms to operate while their paperwork is being processed. For 3 years? Mr. Mercer, I'm not going to debate regulatory timelines with someone who's been in this industry for 6 weeks. The point is that your investigation began with a conclusion and worked backward to find evidence. That's not analysis. That's confirmation bias. The warehouse logs show deliveries that didn't happen, invoices for goods that never arrived, signatures from people who don't work at any carrier, broker, or logistics company registered anywhere in the country. That's not bias, that's data. Victor turned to the board. I want this board to understand what's really happening here. A new employee, hired under unusual circumstances, with no corporate experience, no advanced education, and a personal connection to the CEO, has conducted an unauthorized investigation into my department and is now presenting unverified allegations as fact. This is not due diligence. This is a witch hunt. The phrase personal connection to the CEO landed in the room like a grenade. Ryan saw several board members glance at Olivia, who was sitting at the far end of the table, her face expressionless. There is no personal connection, Olivia said. Her voice was level, but underneath it Ryan could hear the steel. Mr. Mercer was hired through a standard interview process. His investigation was authorized by me as CEO under the company's operational review mandate. Every step he took was within the scope of his role. With respect, Victor said, the circumstances of his hiring were anything but standard. He pulled you out of traffic. You offered him a job the next day. That's not a screening process. It's a rescue fantasy. Careful, Victor. Margaret Ashworth's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Personal attacks are not productive. Let's stay with the evidence. Victor nodded, adjusting. The evidence, then, Mr. Mercer's case rests on warehouse logs maintained by a single employee, DOT registration queries that prove only an administrative gap, and the unremarkable fact that as SVP of Strategic Operations, I signed off on vendor payments, which is literally my job. I sign hundreds of payment authorizations every quarter. That's what the role requires. You also traveled to Schaumburg, Naperville, and a small town in Indiana, Ryan said. All 3 locations match the registered addresses of the vendors you're defending. Short trips, no documented client meetings, no conferences, just hotel rooms and rental cars in places that have no connection to Bennett Dynamics unless you count the shell companies. The room went quiet. Victor's face changed. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, with the villain's mask falling away to reveal the monster beneath. It was subtler than that, a tightening around the eyes, a slight stiffness in the shoulders, the body language of a man whose story has just developed a crack that he can't patch in real time. Those were personal trips, Victor said. I'm not obligated to explain my personal travel to a junior employee. They were booked through the company travel system and charged to your corporate expense account. That makes them company trips, documented and traceable. Marcus Webb, the attorney, leaned forward and whispered something in Victor's ear. Victor listened, nodded, and turned back to the board. I'd like to request a recess, he said, to consult with my counsel. Denied, Margaret said. We'll complete this session before any recess. She looked at Ryan. Mr. Mercer, you mentioned a Thomas Briggs. What is his current status? As of yesterday, he still appeared in the employee directory. I don't know if he's physically in the building. I haven't attempted to contact him because I didn't want to alert him before this presentation. Margaret turned to Diana Cross, who was standing near the door. Diana, find Thomas Briggs. If he's in the building, I want him in security's custody. If he's not, I want to know where he is. Diana left. The room waited. Victor sat very still, his attorney whispering in his ear, his face locked in an expression that was trying to be calm but was slowly, visibly losing the fight. A board member named Howard Liu, a venture capitalist in his 60s who'd been quiet throughout the presentation, spoke up. Mr. Hale, I have a straightforward question. You signed hundreds of payment authorizations for these 3 vendors over 3 years. Did you, at any point, verify that the services billed were actually performed? That's not my function. Verification is handled by the logistics department, which is run by Carl Jennings, who reports to you. Organizationally, yes, but Carl operates with significant autonomy. So you signed off on millions of dollars in payments without independently verifying that the goods were delivered, and the person responsible for verification answers to you. Is that your position? Victor's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I relied on the systems in place, as systems that have functioned for years without issue. Without issue that was reported, Howard said. Mr. Mercer just told us the warehouse manager reported discrepancies multiple times and was ignored. Were those reports directed to you? I don't recall receiving. Patrice Washington's emails are time-stamped and archived, Ryan said quietly. 4 of them went directly to your inbox. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that changes rooms. It was the silence of 12 people arriving at the same conclusion simultaneously, not through persuasion or rhetoric, but through the accumulated weight of numbers that didn't add up and explanations that didn't hold. Diana Cross returned. She stood in the doorway, slightly out of breath. Thomas Briggs didn't come in today. His desk has been cleared. Building security checked the parking garage. His badge was used to exit at 4:47 this morning. Margaret Ashworth set down her fountain pen. I'm going to recommend that the board take the following actions. First, an immediate suspension of Victor Hale's access to all company systems, pending the completion of a full forensic audit. Second, a criminal referral to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Third, a freeze on all payments to the 3 vendor entities identified by Mr. Mercer. Do I have a motion? Howard Liu raised his hand. Moved. Seconded, said another board member, a woman named Patricia Gaines, whom Ryan had never spoken to. All in favor? 10 hands went up. Gerald Pratt kept his hands on the table. Claire Ashford hesitated, then raised hers slowly, her fixed smile finally gone. The motion carries, Margaret said. Victor stood. His chair scraped against the floor. A sharp, ugly sound in the quiet room. He looked at Ryan with an expression that had nothing polished about it anymore. Nothing warm, nothing calculated. It was raw. The face of a man who'd been running a game for years and just watched it collapse in 45 minutes. You have no idea what you've done, he said. Yeah, I do, Ryan said. Victor turned and walked out. Marcus Webb followed, already on his phone. The boardroom doors closed behind them, and the room exhaled. Margaret Ashworth looked at Ryan. Her expression was unreadable, the face of a woman who'd chaired boards for decades and had learned to keep her reactions private. But she nodded, a single, deliberate inclination of the head, and it carried more weight than applause. Well done, Mr. Mercer. Ryan gathered his folder, his laptop, his notes. His hands weren't shaking. He was distantly surprised by that because his whole body felt like a wire that had been pulled taut and suddenly released. He walked to the door, and Olivia fell into step beside him. They didn't speak until they were in the elevator. The doors closed, the boardroom floor receding above them. Then Olivia leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. $6.2 million, she said. Yeah. He sat at my father's dinner table. I know. He gave a speech at the retirement party. He said my father was the most honest man he'd ever known. Her voice cracked on the word honest, and she pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment, fighting something that wanted to come out. Then she straightened, opened her eyes, and looked at Ryan with the same directness she'd had on the curb that first morning. Thank you. You said to save the thank you for after. It's after. The elevator opened on 28. Ryan stepped out, and Olivia stayed in, heading up to her floor. Before the doors closed, she said, Ryan. He turned. Emma's lucky to have you. The doors closed. Ryan stood in the corridor holding his folder and realized his hands were shaking now. Not during the presentation, not during Victor's attacks, not during the vote, but now, alone, in an empty hallway on a Friday morning with the sun coming through the windows and the fight finally over. He went to his office, sat down, and called Mrs. Kowalski. How'd it go? She asked. I won. A pause. then the sound of a woman trying not to cry and failing. Good. That's good. Emma made you a card. She says it's for when you come home. What's on it? A drawing of you. You're wearing a cape. Ryan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. His eyes were burning, but he didn't try to stop it. He sat in his little glass office on the 28th floor, the one Gerald Pratt had warned him about, and he let himself feel everything he'd been holding back for 6 weeks. The fear, the anger, the loneliness, the bone-deep exhaustion of fighting a battle that nobody thought he could win. Then he wiped his face, straightened his tie, and started writing his report. Because the board meeting was over, but the work wasn't, and there was a company that needed fixing, and a daughter who needed picking up from school, and a card with a cape on it waiting for him at home. The weeks after the board meeting were not a victory lap. They were a grind. Victor Hale was arrested on a Tuesday, 11 days after the board vote, at his home in Lincoln Park at 6:15 in the morning, while his wife stood in the doorway in a bathrobe and his attorney stood on the lawn on the phone. The FBI had moved faster than anyone expected, largely because Sarah Chen's forensic report gave them a ready-made roadmap. The bank records, obtained through federal subpoena, confirmed what Ryan had suspected but couldn't prove. Money from all 3 shell companies had been funneled into a personal investment account held under the name of a trust that Victor controlled. $6.2 million over 3 years, laundered through fake invoices and phantom deliveries, skimmed from a company that had trusted him with its operational backbone. Thomas Briggs was picked up the same day at a motel outside Indianapolis. He'd been running since the board meeting, using cash, staying off the grid, with the desperate inefficiency of a man who'd been designed to be invisible inside a system and had no idea how to be invisible outside of one. He cooperated within hours, trading information for a reduced charge, confirming everything Ryan had pieced together: the shell companies, the fake invoices, the fabricated delivery manifests, all of it orchestrated by Victor, all of it running for years under the noses of people who either didn't look or didn't want to see. Carl Jennings was not charged. The investigation concluded that he was negligent, not complicit, a man who'd stopped paying attention to his own department and had let a fraud grow like mold in a wall he never bothered to inspect. He resigned the day after the arrests, quietly, without a statement. Ryan heard later that he'd moved to Michigan and taken up woodworking. It seemed like the right kind of retirement for a man who'd spent 20 years building nothing. The news hit the business press within a week. Bennett Dynamics was suddenly everywhere. Financial pages, cable news, industry blogs. The coverage was mostly factual, though a few outlets ran the story with the breathless tone of a scandal piece, complete with stock photos of handcuffs and courthouse steps. Olivia held a press conference that Ryan watched from his office on the 28th floor, his door closed, his phone silenced. She was precise, composed, and honest. She acknowledged the fraud, described the steps the company had taken to identify and stop it, and took responsibility for the failure of internal controls without making excuses. She didn't mention Ryan by name. He was grateful for that. The last thing he needed was his face on the news. But inside the company, everyone knew. Everyone knew it was the new guy, the one with the bandaged hand and the borrowed shirt and no MBA, who'd pulled the thread that unraveled a $6 million fraud. And the reaction was not what Ryan had expected. He'd braced for gratitude. What he got was something more complicated. Some people thanked him. Patrice Washington called him the day after the arrests and said, "About time somebody listened." A junior analyst in the finance department stopped him in the hallway and told him quietly that she'd noticed discrepancies in the vendor payments 2 years ago and had been afraid to say anything. "You're braver than I was," she said. And Ryan felt the weight of that compliment and its implications. A company where people saw problems and stayed silent because they'd learned that silence was safer than truth, but others resented him. Gerald Pratt didn't speak to him at all. Claire Ashford was professionally cordial but kept her distance, the way someone might keep their distance from an animal they weren't sure was tame. Several board members, people who'd voted in Ryan's favor on Friday, were notably cooler in subsequent interactions, as if the act of doing the right thing had been uncomfortable and they were holding it against the man who'd made them do it. The worst of it came from a direction Ryan hadn't anticipated. 3 weeks after the arrest, Emma came home from school in tears. She didn't cry the way she cried when she scraped a knee or lost a toy. the quick operational tears of a child processing a specific pain. This was different. She walked through the door and went straight to her room without speaking, and when Ryan followed and sat on the edge of her bed, she buried her face in Professor Carrot's and wouldn't look at him. "Emma, talk to me." "I don't want to." "Did something happen at school?" Silence. Then, muffled by the stuffed rabbit, "A boy in my class said his mom said you're a snitch." Ryan felt the word land in his chest like a stone. A snitch. "He said his mom said you got someone fired and now his mom's friend lost her job because of you. He said you're bad." "What's the boy's name?" "Tyler Whitfield." Whitfield. Ryan didn't recognize the name, but it wasn't hard to connect the dots. Victor's arrest had led to the termination of 3 other employees who'd been tangentially involved in the fraud. People who'd processed payments they should have questioned, who'd filed reports they should have flagged. Those terminations had rippled outward through families and social circles, and eventually the ripple had reached a second grader named Tyler, who'd been told by his mother that Emma's father was the reason someone she knew no longer had a paycheck. "Emma, look at me." She wouldn't. "Bug, please." She lifted her face from the rabbit. Her cheeks were wet, her eyes red, and the expression on her face was something Ryan had never seen there before. Not sadness, not anger, but confusion. The confusion of a child trying to reconcile what she'd been told by someone at school with what she knew about her father, and finding that the 2 versions of reality didn't fit together. "Am I bad, Daddy?" "No, you are not bad." Then why did Tyler say? Because Tyler's mom is upset. And when people are upset, they sometimes say things that aren't fair. What I did at work, I found something wrong, something that was hurting a lot of people. And I told the truth about it. Some people are glad I did that. Some people aren't. That doesn't make what I did wrong. But Tyler said his mom's friend can't pay her bills now. Ryan closed his eyes for a second. This was the part they didn't tell you about. Not in the movies, not in the business books, not in the tidy narratives about whistleblowers and corporate heroes. They didn't tell you that doing the right thing sent shrapnel in every direction, and some of that shrapnel hit people who weren't involved and didn't deserve it. They didn't tell you that your 5-year-old would come home crying because the consequences of your courage had landed in a second-grade classroom. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry that happened, but the person who caused all of this, the person who took the money and lied about it, he's the one who hurt Tyler's mom's friend. Not me. I just told the truth." Is telling the truth always the right thing? It was the kind of question that adults spent lifetimes trying to answer. And here it was, delivered by a 5-year-old with a stuffed rabbit and a broken expression, expecting her father to have an answer because that's what fathers were for. "I think so," Ryan said. "Even when it's hard. Even when people get mad. Because if you don't tell the truth, the bad thing just keeps going, and more people get hurt." He paused. "But I'm not going to pretend it doesn't cost something. It does. And I'm sorry it cost you." Emma looked at him for a long time. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand and said, "Can I have a popsicle?" "It's November." "So?" "So yes, you can have a popsicle." He got her a popsicle, grape, her favorite, and sat with her on the couch while she ate it, and they watched a cartoon about a dog who wanted to be an astronaut, and neither of them talked about Tyler Whitfield or the word snitch or the complicated calculus of doing right in a world that didn't always reward it. After she went to bed, Ryan sat at the kitchen table and stared at nothing. The apartment was different now. Not physically, though he'd replaced the broken radiator valve and fixed the hot water by paying a plumber for the first time in 2 years. The difference was less tangible. The eviction notice was gone. The medical debts were in a payment plan he could actually afford. The refrigerator had food in it, real food, the kind you bought when you weren't doing mental math in the grocery aisle. Emma had new shoes, a winter coat that fit, and a spot in a Saturday art class that she talked about with the intensity of a person who discovered her calling. But the scars of the past 2 years were still there, hidden under the new paint. Ryan still checked his bank balance every morning, a reflex he couldn't break. He still felt a jolt of panic when the mail arrived, because for so long the mail had been nothing but bills and threats and the bureaucratic machinery of financial collapse. He still woke at 3 a.m. sometimes, heart pounding, dreaming about the eviction, about packing bags, about Emma's face when he told her they had to leave. You don't survive that kind of thing and come out whole. You come out functional. You come out standing. But the cracks are there and they stay, and the best you can do is build around them and hope the structure holds. The independent audit that Olivia had commissioned was completed in December, 8 weeks after the board meeting. It was thorough, impartial, and comprehensive, conducted by a Big Four accounting firm with no prior relationship to Bennett Dynamics. The findings confirmed Sarah Chen's preliminary report in every detail and added several layers of context that Ryan hadn't been able to uncover on his own. The total fraud was revised upward to $7.8 million. Victor had been at it for nearly 4 years, not 3. The earliest shell company invoices predated Ryan's estimate by 14 months. The money had been funneled through a web of accounts that eventually led to offshore holdings in 2 different jurisdictions. The audit also identified systemic failures in Bennett Dynamics' internal controls, gaps in the approval process, inadequate vendor verification procedures, a culture of deference to senior leadership that had allowed obvious red flags to go unquestioned for years. Olivia presented the audit findings to the board in a closed session that Ryan did not attend. He heard about it afterward from Diana Cross, who stopped by his office with a cup of coffee and a rare, genuine smile. Margaret Ashworth called it the most important internal investigation in the company's history, Diana said. She specifically commended your work. What about Gerald and Claire? Gerald voted to accept the audit findings. He didn't have much choice. The evidence was conclusive. Claire abstained. She's leaving the company. Announced it this morning. Taking a position at a consulting firm in New York. Diana paused. Between us, I think she saw which way the wind was blowing and decided to get out before it blew any harder. Ryan nodded. He didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel vindication. What he felt was tired. The good kind of tired. The kind that comes after you finish something hard and can finally put it down. Diana, can I ask you something? Sure. When I first got here, the badge that didn't work, the meetings where everyone stared at me like I was from another planet, the whole thing, did you think I was going to make it? She looked at him for a moment, considering the question with the same careful assessment she applied to everything. No, she said. I thought you'd last 3 months and leave. Or 3 months and be asked to leave. What changed your mind? You didn't care about being liked. Most new hires say, especially ones who come in under unusual circumstances, spend their first month trying to fit in, trying to learn the culture, trying to make friends. You spent your first month looking at spreadsheets and visiting warehouses. You weren't trying to belong. You were trying to understand. That's a different thing, and most people in this building don't know the difference. She left, and Ryan sat with that for a while. The holidays came. Emma's art class had a show, a small gallery event in a community center on the north side, where children's paintings and drawings were hung on the walls with the same care and seriousness as a real exhibition. Emma had produced a watercolor of their apartment building, painted in the bright, unrestrained colors that children use before the world teaches them to be realistic. The building was purple. The sky was orange. There were birds the size of cars and a sun with a face that was smiling. Ryan stood in front of it for a long time, holding a paper cup of apple cider, and thought about the moment 6 months ago when he'd stood outside this same kind of building and wondered if he could afford the bus fare to get home. Mrs. Kowalski came to the show. She wore a dress, the first time Ryan had ever seen her in anything but her usual house dress and cardigan, and she stood in front of Emma's painting with her arms crossed and her chin up, like a patron at the Met evaluating a masterwork. She's talented, Mrs. Kowalski said. She gets it from her mother. She gets it from both of you. Jenna had the eye. You have the stubbornness. An artist needs both. Ryan looked at her. You never met Jenna. I've seen her and your daughter every day for 2 years. That's meeting someone. She uncrossed her arms and patted his shoulder, a gesture so uncharacteristic that Ryan almost dropped his cider. You did good, Ryan, all of it. The job, the investigation, the girl. You did good. I had help. You, mostly. I made soup and watched a child. You ran into traffic and took on criminals. Let's not pretend those are the same thing. The soup was terrible. I know. Emma told me. Repeatedly. They stood together in front of the purple building and the orange sky and the birds the size of cars, and for a moment, the world was exactly the size of that painting. Small, bright, manageable, a place where the sun had a face and it was smiling. In January, Olivia called Ryan into her office and told him the board had voted to promote him. Senior Vice President of Operations, Victor's old title, reimagined and restructured with expanded authority over internal controls, vendor management, and compliance. Ryan sat across from her desk and didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. "You're quiet," Olivia said. "I'm processing." "Take your time." Senior Vice President. That's a big title for a guy who was counting coins on his kitchen floor 8 months ago. It's a big title for anyone, but the board didn't give it to you because of what happened 8 months ago. They gave it to you because of what you've done since. The fraud investigation, yes, but also the operational improvements you've implemented, the vendor verification system you designed, the way you've rebuilt trust in departments that had lost it. You've changed the way this company works, Ryan. From the inside, that's what leaders do. Some of the board members still don't like me. Some of the board members don't like me. That's corporate governance. You're not being hired to be liked. You're being hired to be right. That sounds like something I said once. It is. I was listening. She paused, and that wall she kept between them, the professional distance, the CEO armor, lowered again, the way it did sometimes in private, in moments when the building was quiet and the politics were far away and they were just two people who'd been through something together. The salary is significant, benefits, stock options, the whole package. You can move out of that apartment, get Emma into a better school, start building something instead of just surviving. I like the apartment. The hot water doesn't work. It works now. I fixed it. You fixed a radiator valve. The building is still falling apart. It has character. Olivia shook her head, but she was almost smiling, and the almost smile softened the sharp lines of her face in a way that reminded Ryan of the woman on the curb, shaken, grateful, human behind the title. Take the job, Ryan. I'll take the job. Good. There's a gala next month. Annual company event, black tie. You'll need a suit. I own a suit. Do you? No, but I can buy one. I'm a senior vice president now. She laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind that came from the same deep place as the one he'd produced on the phone with Mrs. Kowalski months ago. It changed her face entirely. Not prettier. More real. More like the person she might have been if she hadn't spent her entire adult life carrying a company on her back. Buy a good one, she said. You'll be standing next to me. The gala was held in February in the grand ballroom of a hotel on Michigan Avenue. Ryan had never been to a black tie event. He'd seen them in movies, the chandeliers, the champagne, the men in tuxedos and women in gowns moving through rooms that seemed designed to make ordinary life feel small. But being there, standing in it, wearing a suit that fit properly for the first time in his life, was different from watching. It was overwhelming in a way he hadn't prepared for. The ballroom was full, 400 people, employees and partners and board members and guests, all dressed in the kind of clothing that communicated not just wealth, but the specific kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Ryan moved through the crowd like a man walking through a language he was still learning, understanding most of it, missing some of it, occasionally stumbling on a word or a custom that reminded him how far he'd come from the kitchen floor where he'd counted coins with his daughter. He found Patrice Washington near the bar wearing a blue dress and an expression of amused discomfort. I hate these things, she said. First time? Third, they invite the warehouse staff every year. Most of us don't come. I come for the shrimp. Fair. You clean up nice, by the way, for a guy who showed up at my warehouse looking like he'd lost a fight. I get that a lot. Patrice held up her glass. To the guy who actually listened. Ryan clinked his glass against hers. To the woman who kept the records. Damn right. At 9 o'clock, Olivia took the stage. The ballroom quieted, 400 people turning their attention to a woman in a black dress who stood at a podium and looked out at the company she'd inherited, nearly lost, and fought to save. She talked about the past year, the challenges, the investigation, the changes, She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't spin it. She talked about the failure of trust that had allowed the fraud to happen, about the systemic weaknesses that had been exposed, about the work that remained. And then she talked about Ryan. 8 months ago, she said, I was standing in the middle of an intersection on Adams Street. I don't remember why I stopped. I don't remember what I was thinking. All I remember is the sound of someone running toward me, not away. And then the impact, and the pavement, and a stranger's arms around me. That stranger saved my life. And then he walked into this company and saved it too. The room was quiet. Ryan Mercer didn't come to Bennett Dynamics with an Ivy League degree or a consulting pedigree or a network of influential contacts. He came with something that, in my experience, is rare and more valuable than any of those things. The willingness to do what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's risky, even when the people around him are telling him to sit down and be quiet. She paused. This company is stronger because of him. I am stronger because of him. And I wanted all of you to hear me say that publicly so that there is never any question about what kind of people we value at Bennett Dynamics. She looked at Ryan, who was standing near the back of the room, trying very hard to keep his composure. Ryan, would you come up here? He walked to the stage, 400 people watching. The chandelier light was warm and slightly blinding, and the room felt enormous, and his new suit fit perfectly, and his hands weren't shaking. Olivia extended her hand and he shook it. Right hand this time, fully healed, no bandage, no scrape, just a faint scar across the palm where the asphalt had opened his skin on the morning that everything changed. Thank you, she said into the microphone so the whole room could hear. And then, quieter, just for him. I meant everything. I know, he said. So did I. The applause started. It built slowly, the way real applause does. Not the polished, synchronized clapping of a rehearsed audience, but the uneven, genuine sound of people who'd watched something happen and decided it mattered. Ryan stood on the stage and let it wash over him. And he didn't smile because what he felt was too big for a smile, too complicated, too layered with everything he'd carried and everything he'd lost and everything he'd fought for. After the gala, he drove home. The city was beautiful at night. The buildings lit up, the lake a dark mirror, the streets carrying the last of the evening's traffic, like veins carrying blood. He drove through neighborhoods he knew and neighborhoods he didn't, and he thought about the distance between who he'd been 8 months ago and who he was now, and how that distance couldn't be measured in miles or dollars or titles, but only in the things he'd chosen to do when nobody was watching and nothing was certain. He parked outside the apartment building. Mrs. Kowalski had agreed to stay late. She was asleep on the couch when he came in, the television on, a plate of kolaczki on the coffee table. He turned off the TV, draped a blanket over her, and ate a pastry standing in the kitchen. It was perfect. Flaky, sweet, with a ribbon of jam in the center. He went to Emma's room. She was asleep, sprawled across her bed, Professor Carrots wedged under her chin, one sock on and one sock off. Her art class painting was pinned to the wall above her desk. The purple building, the orange sky, the smiling sun. Next to it was the card she'd made for him after the board meeting, the one with the drawing of Ryan wearing a cape. He sat on the edge of her bed and adjusted her blanket. She stirred, opened one eye, and looked at him with the bleary, half-conscious recognition of a child surfacing from deep sleep. Daddy? Hey, Bug, go back to sleep. You're wearing a suit. I had a party. Was it fun? It was something. You look handsome. Thanks, Em. She closed her eye, then opened it again. Are we okay now? The question hit him the way her questions always did. Straight to the center, no detour, no diplomacy. Are we okay now? Not are we rich, not are we safe, not do we have enough. Are we okay? The simplest, biggest question a child could ask. Yeah, Bug. We're okay. Promise? Promise. She smiled, half asleep, lopsided, the echo of her mother in every line, and turned over, pulling Professor Carrots closer, burrowing into her pillow with the total commitment of a child who trusts the answer she's been given. Ryan sat there for a while. The apartment was quiet. The radiator ticked. Outside, the city hummed its nighttime song. Sirens and traffic and wind and the distant, restless sound of 10 million lives being lived at once. He thought about Jenna. He thought about what she would have said if she could see them now. The apartment with the working hot water, the refrigerator with real food, the daughter in art class, the father in a suit that fit. She would have been proud, but she also would have been honest because Jenna was always honest. And she would have said something like, "Don't let the suit change you. Don't let the title make you forget what it felt like to count coins on the floor. That's what makes you who you are, not the promotion, not the applause, but the fact that you know what it's like to have nothing, and you chose to be decent anyway." He could hear her voice so clearly that for a moment it felt like she was in the room. She wasn't. She was gone, and she'd been gone for 2 years, and no amount of success or recognition or financial security was going to change that. But her voice lived in the choices he made, in the way he raised their daughter, in the man he'd become not despite the loss, but through it. She was present in every decision to tell the truth, every refusal to back down, every moment he chose integrity over comfort. That was her legacy, and it was more valuable than anything Bennett Dynamics could put in a paycheck. Ryan stood up from the bed. He loosened his tie, hung the suit jacket on the back of a chair, and walked to the kitchen. The business card was still there, Olivia's card, the one she'd given him on the curb 8 months ago, now worn at the edges, the blue ink on the back slightly faded but still legible. Don't quit. He hadn't. He'd been knocked down, underestimated, threatened, dismissed, and tested in every way a person could be tested. And he hadn't quit. Not because he was a hero, he wasn't, and he'd be the first to say it, but because quitting wasn't something he could afford, and not just financially. He couldn't afford it morally. He couldn't afford it as a father. He couldn't afford it as a man who looked at himself in the mirror every morning and needed to see someone his daughter could be proud of. That was the thing about survival that the movies got wrong. They showed the big moments, the truck, the boardroom, the confrontation, the applause. But survival wasn't made of big moments. It was made of small ones. Ironing a shirt 3 times because the collar wouldn't sit right. Eating cold pasta standing at the counter because you were too tired to sit down. Reading your daughter a chapter about a mouse who wanted to be a chef, even when your hands were shaking and your mind was racing and the numbers in your head wouldn't stop adding up to 0. Survival was getting up at 5:30 and doing it again. And again. And again. Until eventually, slowly, the numbers started to change. Ryan set the business card back on the counter. He turned off the kitchen light. He checked the lock on the front door. Once, the way he always did, because old habits die slow. Then he went to bed. The alarm was set for 6. Emma had art class in the morning. Mrs. Kowalski was asleep on the couch and would need coffee when she woke up. There was Kolachki on the counter and a suit hanging on a chair and a daughter breathing softly through the wall, and the city outside was dark and cold and full of people fighting their own battles, counting their own coins, ironing their own shirts, hoping that tomorrow would be better than today. And somewhere in that city, a man who'd run into traffic on an October morning without thinking, without calculating, without knowing that the woman he was saving would save him right back. That man was finally at rest. Not because the fight was over. The fight was never over, but because he'd learned something that couldn't be taught in any classroom or boardroom or business school. He'd learned that the measure of a life isn't the title on your desk or the number in your bank account or the applause at a gala. It's the choices you make when nobody's watching. It's the truth you tell when lying would be easier. It's the way you love your daughter and honor your wife's memory and treat the people around you, the warehouse managers and the elderly neighbors and the strangers frozen in intersections, with the kind of basic, stubborn, unyielding decency that doesn't need a degree or a pedigree or a fancy suit. Just a man. Flawed, tired, scared sometimes, standing in a kitchen in a neighborhood where the building had character and the Kolotsky was perfect and the painting on the wall had an orange sky. That was enough. That had always been enough. Ryan Mercer closed his eyes and slept.